The invitation came unexpectedly, a cryptic message with no sender's name. Just a time, a place, and a request. Meet me if you dare. Elon Musk was used to the strange and unusual, but this one caught his attention. Who was this anonymous person who wanted his attention so badly? Elon wasn't in the habit of accepting unsolicited invitations, but this one felt different. Something about it piqued his curiosity, and that was a feeling he never ignored. The time was set, 7 p.m. The place, a private facility hidden from the public eye, tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. Elon had nothing better to do that evening. The SpaceX mission was moving along smoothly, and his brain was craving a new puzzle to solve. So, with his usual curiosity and a slight thrill, he set off to meet this unknown entity. When he arrived, the building was sleek and minimalistic, almost too sterile. The walls were lined with advanced technology, the air smelled faintly of machinery and steel, and the lighting gave the entire place a futuristic feel. It felt like stepping into one of his own projects, only more mysterious. He was greeted at the entrance by a woman who offered no explanation, only a nod and a gesture to follow her. "Right this way, Mr. Musk," she said in a cool, calm voice. There was something about her that seemed off, but he shrugged it off. This was his world. Nothing he hadn't seen before, right? The deeper they walked into the building, the more he felt the buzz of innovation in the air. It wasn't just a lab. It felt like something much bigger. And then they arrived at a door, which was slightly ajar. The woman turned to him, her eyes locked onto his with an unsettling gaze. "He's waiting for you," she said before walking away, leaving him to enter the room alone. Elon stepped through the door, and the first thing he saw was a child. An 11-year-old boy, sitting calmly at a large desk surrounded by sleek computer screens and high-tech gadgets. The child looked up when Elon entered, his eyes sharp and calculating, yet somehow knowing. "Mr. Musk," the boy said in a voice that seemed far too mature for someone so young. "Please sit." Elon froze for a moment, taken aback. This was the mysterious genius he had been summoned to meet? A child? An 11-year-old, who appeared to have the kind of confidence and intelligence that many adults spend a lifetime trying to achieve. Okay, Elon said, still trying to process the situation. He took a seat across from the boy, eyeing the room curiously. The screens in front of the child were filled with equations, algorithms, and simulations. Things that Elon could understand, but only with immense concentration. And the boy, Isaac, was tapping away at the keyboard like it was second nature. "Who are you?" Elon finally asked. "And why do you need me here?" Isaac didn't immediately answer. Instead, he turned one of the screens toward Elon. It displayed an intricate model of a spacecraft, but it was nothing like what Elon had ever seen before. It was faster, sleeker, and had far more potential than anything SpaceX was currently working on. "I have a theory," Isaac said casually, as though he were explaining a simple math problem. "I believe we can develop a form of propulsion that's both faster and more energy efficient than any current method." Elon raised an eyebrow. "Faster? We've been working on that for years, but there are limitations." Isaac's eyes gleamed, the kind of gleam only a genius would have when revealing something they know others cannot. "Yes, but your limitations are based on your understanding of physics. You're using the wrong equations, Mr. Musk. You're missing a piece of the puzzle." Elon leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. This kid, this 11-year-old, was talking about space travel as if it were just another project. He had to admit, it was impressive. Still, Elon wasn't one to easily believe in such bold claims. He needed proof. "You want me to believe that you've solved a problem that has stumped the brightest minds in the world?" Elon asked, his voice skeptical but not dismissive. Isaac didn't flinch. Instead, he turned to one of the monitors, tapping a few keys. The screen changed, displaying a set of complex calculations. It took Elon a moment to process, but when he did, his breath caught. Isaac had presented an entirely new form of propulsion. It was elegant, efficient, and, if it worked, revolutionary. Elon could see the potential. He could feel it in his gut. "Are you telling me you've figured this out?" Elon asked, his voice quieter now, his skepticism turning into cautious excitement. Isaac nodded, his eyes never leaving Elon's. I have, and I need you to help me make it real. Elon took a step back in his mind. This was the kind of thing he had always dreamed of. Someone younger, someone with a new perspective, someone who could take humanity to the next level. But this was different. This was an 11-year-old. His mind was sharp, yes, but how could someone that young have the depth of understanding needed to revolutionize space travel? You're just a kid, Elon said, more to himself than Isaac. How could you? Isaac's voice interrupted him, low and sure. Don't underestimate me, Mr. Musk. My IQ is 162. Elon blinked, taken aback. A 162 IQ was extraordinary. In fact, it was higher than his own. Suddenly, the pieces started to fall into place. This wasn't just a prodigy. This was someone who was already operating on a level that few adults could even comprehend. Why me? Elon asked, his curiosity growing. Why did you pick me to help you? Isaac leaned back in his chair, considering the question for a moment. Then, with a small but confident smile, he said, because you understand the value of disruption. You're not afraid to take risks. You want to change the world. So do I. The words hit Elon in the gut. The boy was right. There was a fire in Isaac's eyes, a fire that mirrored his own when he first set out to create Tesla and SpaceX. It was the same fire that drove him to build things others thought were impossible. And for a moment, Elon realized that this could be the opportunity of a lifetime. A chance to mentor a prodigy who might just change the course of history. All right, Isaac, Elon said, his voice steady now. Let's see what you've got. Isaac's smile grew wider, and for the first time that evening, Elon felt a strange sense of excitement. An excitement for the unknown. This wasn't just another meeting. This was the beginning of something far bigger than either of them could have imagined. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The adventure had just begun. Isaac Quinn didn't look like a typical genius. With his tousled brown hair, oversized glasses, and a quiet, almost shy demeanor, he could have easily blended in with the other kids at his school. But there was something in the way he carried himself, an unspoken confidence, an intensity behind those wide, bright eyes, that told anyone who looked closely that Isaac was unlike anyone else. Elon leaned back in his chair, staring at Isaac, trying to wrap his mind around the reality of what he was witnessing. This wasn't just some whiz kid with a penchant for solving math problems in seconds. Isaac was different. His brilliance wasn't confined to one area. It spanned physics, mathematics, even philosophy. And all of it had been honed by years of self-discipline and an insatiable hunger for knowledge. As Isaac began to explain his theory about the propulsion system again, Elon listened intently, trying to gauge the boy's depth of understanding. Isaac spoke with such clarity, such precision, it was clear that he didn't just memorize facts. He lived and breathed them. The complexity of the equations Isaac rattled off made Elon's head spin, but what really struck him was Isaac's passion. You see, Isaac said, adjusting his glasses as he pointed to the display on the screen. The traditional methods of propulsion are based on the idea that we need to expel mass to create forward thrust. But what if we didn't need to do that? What if we could manipulate space-time itself, bending it to our will? Elon felt his heart race a little. The concept Isaac was suggesting wasn't just groundbreaking. It was mind-bending. It was the kind of idea that could change everything. Isaac was talking about a new form of space travel, one that didn't rely on the current understanding of propulsion. But could it work? Isaac continued, oblivious to Elon's growing fascination. If we create a disturbance in the fabric of space-time, essentially a warp bubble, we could move an object faster than the speed of light without violating the laws of physics. It's theoretical, of course, but the math checks out. Hold on, Elon interrupted, trying to process. Faster than the speed of light? You're talking about warp drives, like in Star Trek? Isaac looked up, his eyes glinting with amusement. Yes, but not exactly. This isn't just some science fiction idea. The concept was first proposed by physicist Miguel Alcubierre, but it requires an enormous amount of energy, and we're still far from achieving it. Elon couldn't help but smile. The boy was brilliant. No, a genius. But he wasn't just reciting theories. Isaac had an intuitive grasp of what had previously been considered impossible, and the way he talked about it with such casual confidence made it seem like it was within reach. For a moment, Elon almost forgot that Isaac was only 11 years old. Elon leaned forward, eager to dig deeper. So, what's your next step? How do you plan to make this happen? Isaac didn't hesitate. I've been working on the math for a while now, and I think I can build a prototype. The real challenge is generating the energy required to warp space-time. But if we can harness the right kind of energy source, something like antimatter or a controlled fusion reaction, we could potentially create the conditions necessary to make this work. Elon's mind raced. This was the kind of breakthrough he had been waiting for his entire career. But the practicalities of turning theory into reality were always far more complicated than they appeared on paper. Still, if anyone could do it, Isaac seemed like the one. What kind of energy source are you thinking about? Elon asked, his curiosity piqued. You mentioned antimatter. Have you done any experiments with that? Isaac shook his head, his expression serious. Not yet, but I've been reading up on the latest research in quantum mechanics and energy conversion. The problem is that antimatter is incredibly unstable and difficult to store. But I believe there's a way to stabilize it using electromagnetic fields, and that could be our key to powering the warp drive. Elon blinked, impressed. Isaac wasn't just talking about abstract theories. He was already thinking about practical solutions. The way Isaac's mind worked was different. He could connect dots that others couldn't even see. It was clear that the boy wasn't just smart. He was in a league of his own. I have to admit, Elon said, this is incredible. You've got something here, Isaac. Something that could change the future of space exploration. Isaac smiled, but there was a hint of something deeper in his eyes. A hint of quiet desperation. I know, Mr. Musk. That's why I need your help. Elon's gaze softened. Isaac wasn't asking for validation. He was asking for partnership. The weight of that request hit him harder than he expected. It wasn't just a matter of funding or resources. Isaac was asking him to be part of something bigger than both of them. You want me to mentor you, Elon said slowly, the realization dawning on him. Isaac nodded. Yes, I can do the theory. I can do the math. But I need someone who understands how to make it real. I need someone who has the resources and the vision to push this idea forward. I need you, Mr. Musk. Elon was silent for a moment, considering Isaac's words. This wasn't a typical request, not by any means. But there was something about Isaac's conviction, his raw intelligence, that resonated with him. Elon had always been a disruptor, someone who saw the world differently and wasn't afraid to challenge conventional thinking. And here, sitting across from him, was a child who was doing exactly that. All right, Elon said, his voice steady. I'll help you. But we're going to need more than just math. We'll need a team, resources, a plan. And we're going to have to move fast. Isaac's eyes lit up with excitement. I can build the prototype. I've already designed the basic framework. If we have the right energy source, I'm confident we can make it work. Elon smiled, feeling the spark of something incredible beginning to take shape. This was no longer just a conversation about science. This was the beginning of a new chapter in human history, a chapter that could rewrite the very laws of physics as they knew them. Let's make history, Elon said, extending his hand across the table. Isaac shook it, a firm grip for someone so young. I'm ready. And with that, the adventure began. The following week was a whirlwind of activity. Elon was no stranger to fast-paced, high-stakes projects, but this felt different. This wasn't just another SpaceX launch or another Tesla prototype. This was something new, something groundbreaking. And it all started with Isaac Quinn, a young prodigy with an IQ higher than Elon's own, someone who seemed to have a vision that could revolutionize the very fabric of space travel. Isaac had already designed the initial blueprints for his warp drive prototype, and now it was time to get to work. The first hurdle was securing a team, specifically, a team capable of helping Isaac turn his theoretical ideas into something tangible. Elon knew that he needed the best minds in the world for this task, but he also knew that it would take more than just raw intellect to make this work. It would take collaboration, perseverance, and an unwavering belief that they were on the cusp of something monumental. Elon was used to assembling top-tier teams, but this time, he had an edge. He wasn't just seeking engineers and scientists. He was seeking the best of the best, but also the ones who weren't afraid to challenge the status quo, to think outside the box, to push the boundaries of what was possible. Isaac, for his part, was ready. Every day, he would spend hours working on his equations, refining his models, and ensuring that every detail was perfect. He was obsessive in his work, not out of arrogance, but because he understood the magnitude of what they were attempting. He knew that one mistake, one wrong calculation, could set them back months, even years. But Isaac had never been one to shy away from challenges. He thrived under pressure. And now, with Elon's help, he was ready to take the first step. Elon reached out to his network, pulling in the best minds in the field of physics, engineering, and quantum mechanics. The team began to form, a mix of seasoned veterans and young visionaries eager to be part of something bigger than themselves. And as the days went by, the excitement grew. There was an energy in the air, a sense that they were on the verge of discovering something no one else had even dreamed of. But there were still many obstacles to overcome. The most immediate one was finding the right energy source. Isaac had spoken about antimatter, but the idea of harnessing such an unstable force was daunting. Elon knew that antimatter wasn't just dangerous, it was nearly impossible to produce in any meaningful quantity. And then there was the issue of controlling it long enough to use it as a viable power source for the warp drive. They were dealing with forces that no one had fully understood before, let alone tamed. Isaac wasn't fazed by the enormity of the task. In fact, he relished it. As he sat in front of a blackboard one evening, scribbling down equations with a whiteboard marker, he looked more like a mad scientist than an 11-year-old boy. But there was a calmness to his work, a precision that made it clear he knew exactly what he was doing. Elon watched him from the doorway, amazed at how far Isaac had come in such a short time. The kid was relentless, not just in his intellectual pursuit, but in his belief that they could make the impossible possible. For Elon, it was hard to imagine that someone so young could have such a firm grasp on reality, but Isaac wasn't just talking theory, he was making it real. "Elon," Isaac called out, breaking Elon from his thoughts. "I think I've found a solution to the energy problem." Elon walked over to Isaac, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Isaac turned around, a small smile on his face. "I've been thinking about fusion. We could use a miniature fusion reactor to generate the amount of power we need. It's not easy, but I've come up with a design that should work. It won't be ready for a while, but it's a start." Elon raised an eyebrow. "Fusion? That's a huge leap, Isaac. Are you sure?" Isaac nodded, his eyes bright with excitement. "I know it sounds crazy, but the math works out. If we can create a stable fusion reaction and couple it with the warp drive, we might be able to generate enough energy to manipulate space-time. I've already started working on the containment system." Elon took a moment to absorb what Isaac had said. Fusion. It was the holy grail of energy sources and the key to unlocking so many of humanity's deepest dreams. But it was also the most difficult to achieve, even for the brightest minds in the world. And Isaac, at just 11 years old, was talking about it like it was just another problem to solve. "Well, I can't say I'm not impressed," Elon said with a grin. "You've got a lot of guts, Isaac. But if you think it's possible, I'll back you up. Let's get the best fusion experts on board. Let's make this happen." Isaac's smile widened. "Thank you, Elon. I promise you won't regret it." For the next few weeks, the team went into full-throttle mode. Scientists from all over the world came together, contributing their expertise in quantum mechanics, propulsion systems, energy sources, and more. Isaac, with his incredible intellect and unshakable determination, led the way. He was more than just a child prodigy. He was the driving force behind this project, and Elon was content to stand beside him, offering guidance and resources whenever necessary. But as the days went on, the challenges only grew. The team was making progress, but there were setbacks, unexpected problems with the fusion reactor design, difficulties with the containment system, and the persistent question of whether the warp drive would even be possible. The path forward wasn't clear, but Elon had never been one to back down from a challenge. And neither had Isaac. One evening, after another long day of brainstorming and troubleshooting, Isaac and Elon found themselves alone in the lab, staring at the prototype on the table. The design wasn't pretty yet, There were wires, blueprints, and parts strewn everywhere, but it was the beginning of something groundbreaking. They had made their first tangible progress, and it was only a matter of time before they would begin testing. Isaac broke the silence, his voice thoughtful. Do you ever wonder if we're really doing the right thing? I mean, this could change everything. It's not just space travel. It could change the way we think about the universe itself. Elon looked at him, a serious expression crossing his face. I think about it all the time. We're not just building a new spacecraft, Isaac. We're building a new future. But we can't let fear hold us back. If we truly believe in this, we have to push forward, no matter the cost. Isaac nodded, a quiet determination settling over him. We will. And in that moment, they both knew that they were on the edge of something incredible. Together, they would either succeed in altering the course of history or face the consequences of their ambition. But they were both willing to take that risk. The world had no idea what was coming, but soon it would. Isaac didn't sleep much. In fact, he rarely slept at all, not when there was so much to do. With the team working around the clock, progress was being made, but not as quickly as Isaac would have liked. Every day, he would go over his calculations again and again, refining the warp drive's design, tweaking the fusion reactor blueprints, and analyzing the containment system. He was getting closer. He could feel it. But as every engineer and physicist on the team told him, the journey from concept to reality was never linear. There were always hurdles, setbacks, and moments when the road ahead seemed unclear. Elon, on the other hand, had always been a man who thrived in chaos. His experience with SpaceX and Tesla had taught him to move fast, to make bold decisions, and to trust his instincts. And so far, he trusted Isaac's instincts. He had no reason not to. The boy was brilliant, perhaps even more so than anyone else he'd ever worked with. But that didn't make things easy. It made them even harder. Elon sat at his desk in the control room, scrolling through the latest updates from the team. The fusion reactor was proving to be the most difficult part. The containment field was unstable, and the energy levels fluctuated wildly when they attempted to charge it. The team had run into a wall. They could simulate the power required to manipulate spacetime, but they couldn't actually generate it in a real-world application. Elon rubbed his forehead, trying to think of a solution. And then his phone buzzed. It was a message from Isaac. Elon, I think I've figured it out. I need to show you something in person. Can you come to the lab? Elon didn't hesitate. He grabbed his jacket and headed out the door, his mind racing with possibilities. When Isaac sent a message like that, it usually meant something big was about to happen. By the time Elon arrived at the lab, Isaac was already waiting by the whiteboard, markers in hand. The board was filled with complex equations and designs, but there was something different about them. It wasn't just theoretical anymore. There was something tangible about the way Isaac had outlined the problem. Elon stepped into the room, his curiosity piqued. What VE you got for me, Isaac? Isaac didn't waste any time. He gestured to the board. I think we've been going about the containment system all wrong. Elon raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Isaac's eyes shone with excitement. We've been focusing too much on stabilizing the fusion reaction in a traditional way. But what if the fusion itself is just a side effect of the actual process? What if, instead of trying to contain the energy, we could focus on controlling the way it interacts with spacetime? Elon was silent for a moment, processing Isaac's words. The boy was proposing something radical, something no one had thought of before. The idea of using the fusion reaction to control spacetime itself wasn't new, but Isaac was suggesting they turn the approach on its head. Instead of containing the energy in the conventional way, Isaac was proposing to harness the energy as a tool to manipulate spacetime directly. Elon, look at this, Isaac continued, drawing lines on the whiteboard. If we adjust the fusion reaction to emit energy in pulses instead of a constant stream, we can control the flux of energy. We could create a fluctuating field that interacts with spacetime in a way that's much more manageable. Elon leaned in closer, his mind racing. It was a brilliant idea. If Isaac was right, they could bypass the unstable nature of the fusion reaction and use it as a trigger to create the warp bubble, a controlled and pulsed release of energy that could bend spacetime. That could work, Elon said, nodding slowly. It's unconventional, but if we can time the pulses just right, we might be able to generate the conditions we need. Isaac's grin widened. Exactly. I've run the numbers, and I think I found a way to stabilize the process. It's not perfect, but I think it's a solid foundation. Elon took a step back and surveyed the room. The entire lab had been transformed into a chaotic but strangely inspiring space. Engineers and scientists were clustered around workstations, each contributing to the effort in their own way. Everyone was working tirelessly toward the same goal, turning Isaac's theoretical ideas into reality. "We're getting close," Elon said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "But we still need the power source. That's the real challenge." Isaac nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I've been thinking about that too. We could try integrating a superconducting coil into the reactor. It could store the energy and release it in a controlled way, like a capacitor. That way, we can stabilize the pulses." Elon's eyes widened. It was a simple solution, but an effective one. By using superconducting materials, they could harness the energy more efficiently and control it more precisely. "Isaac, you're onto something," Elon said, a renewed sense of optimism in his voice. "If we can get the fusion reaction stabilized and incorporate the superconducting coils, we might actually have a working prototype." Isaac's face lit up with excitement, but he quickly tempered his enthusiasm. "It's not done yet. We still have a lot of work ahead. But this is the breakthrough we needed." Over the next few days, the team worked non-stop, tweaking the design and refining the system. Isaac and Elon spent long hours in the lab, constantly testing new configurations and theories. They pushed their resources to the limit, but the progress was undeniable. The prototype began to take shape, slowly but surely. The fusion reactor was still a delicate beast, but with Isaac's new design, the containment field had become much more stable. The pulsing energy was exactly what they needed to trigger the warp bubble. They weren't just theorizing anymore. They were getting closer to seeing their ideas come to life. Late one night, after hours of testing, Isaac turned to Elon with a wide grin. "It's time. We're ready for our first test." Elon hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Let's do it." The room fell silent as the team gathered around the prototype, holding their breath. Isaac typed a few commands into the terminal, and a low hum filled the air. For a brief moment, nothing happened. But then, something changed. A faint, shimmering distortion appeared in the air above the prototype, flickering like a mirage. Elon stared in disbelief. The prototype was actually working. A small, controlled warp bubble, a tangible sign that their theory wasn't just a dream. It was real. Isaac stood tall, his face alight with triumph. "It's just the beginning," he said quietly. "But we did it." Elon nodded, a sense of awe washing over him. "We've just made history." But the journey was far from over. They had taken the first step toward revolutionizing space travel, but the true test was yet to come. Could they scale this technology? Could they make it work on a larger, more practical level? The world was still unaware of the revolution that was unfolding in that small, secretive lab. But in that moment, Elon Musk and Isaac Quinn had done what no one thought possible. They had taken the first step toward breaking the boundaries of space itself. The success of their first test sent shockwaves through the team. They had achieved something that was once thought to be purely theoretical, a controlled warp bubble. The implications of what they had just done were far-reaching. Elon knew they had taken the first step, but the road ahead was still filled with unknowns. Could they replicate the results? Could they scale the technology? And most importantly, could they use it to do what they had always dreamed of, travel beyond the stars? But those questions would have to wait. There was more immediate work to be done. The team had proved that the concept was feasible, but they now had to refine the technology, improve the fusion reactor, and find a way to create a stable, reliable source of energy. The power they had generated in the first test was minuscule, barely enough to bend space for a fraction of a second, but it was a start. Isaac, who had barely slept since the first test, was already back at the drawing board. He had a laser-like focus, the kind of dedication that only someone who truly believed in what they were doing could have. He was living in the lab, poring over equations, and making constant adjustments to the prototype. Every time he found a solution to one problem, he would find two more waiting for him. But it didn't discourage him. In fact, it seemed to fuel him. "Elon, on the other hand, was managing the business side of things, securing more funding and resources to keep the project moving forward. He had already reached out to a few of his most trusted partners, explaining the success of the prototype, but he knew that keeping the project under wraps for as long as possible was critical. Too many eyes on the project could lead to too many questions. And right now, he wasn't ready to answer any of them. One of the most challenging aspects of their work was the energy source. Isaac's design for the fusion reactor had potential, but it still required a lot of refinement. There was also the problem of stabilizing the reactor long enough to produce the energy they needed. The team's resources were stretched thin, and every step forward seemed to require 2 more steps backward. "Elon," Isaac said one evening, looking up from his work, "I've been thinking." Elon sat back in his chair, a tired smile on his face. "That's never a good sign." Isaac's lips twitched into a small grin. "I think we can increase the energy output if we introduce a superconducting material into the fusion core. I've been looking into this, and I think it could help us stabilize the reaction long enough to produce the kind of energy we need." Elon raised an eyebrow. "Superconductors? That's a bold move. You sure about this?" Isaac nodded with confidence. "I've run the simulations. It's the next logical step. The materials exist, we just need to find the right combination." Elon was silent for a moment, contemplating the idea. He had learned to trust Isaac's intuition, but this was a huge risk. Superconducting materials were notoriously difficult to work with, especially under the extreme conditions they were dealing with. But Isaac was right about one thing. They needed to think bigger if they were going to make this work. "All right," Elon said finally, his voice firm. "Let's move forward with it. But we need to bring in the right people, get some experts on superconductivity. We don't want to make any mistakes here." Isaac nodded, already moving to pull up the necessary data. "I'll start contacting a few people. We need the best." The next few days were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and emails. Elon's network of experts was vast, and soon they had assembled a team of superconductivity specialists to join the project. They were able to source the materials needed to start testing Isaac's new design, and the lab was buzzing with activity once again. Despite the excitement, there was an undercurrent of tension. Everyone knew that time was running out. The pressure to succeed was mounting. The world would soon start asking questions, and they couldn't afford to fail. Elon and Isaac both understood that the stakes were higher than ever. The fusion reactor, now incorporating superconducting materials, was ready for its next test. The new design promised to increase the energy output significantly, but there were still so many unknowns. Could the superconducting core withstand the intense conditions inside the reactor? Would it be able to release the energy in a controlled enough manner to stabilize the warp bubble? Isaac, once again, was in the lab late into the night, calibrating the new system. Elon stood nearby, watching as Isaac worked with quiet determination. The boy was a machine, his mind moving faster than anyone around him could keep up. But it wasn't just his intellect that made Isaac remarkable. It was his ability to keep going, to keep trying, even when the problem seemed insurmountable. Elon couldn't help but feel a sense of awe watching Isaac. This young prodigy had become the beating heart of the project, and it was clear that Isaac was driven by something much deeper than ambition. He wasn't just trying to prove a point or make a name for himself. He truly believed that what they were doing could change the world. "Isaac," Elon said, breaking the silence, "do you ever stop to think about how far we've come? I mean, not just with the warp drive, but with everything." Isaac didn't look up from his work, but his voice was steady. "I think about it all the time. But it's not about how far we've come. It's about how far we still have to go. We've only scratched the surface." Elon smiled at that, impressed by Isaac's humility. The kid was onto something. They had come so far, but the real journey was just beginning. The final test was set for the following day. The team had made all the necessary adjustments, and the reactor was now ready to be tested at full capacity. Everyone gathered in the control room, their eyes trained on the monitors as Isaac prepared to activate the fusion core. "This is it," Isaac said quietly, as he pressed a button on the console. For a brief moment, the lab was still. Then, a hum filled the air, growing louder and louder as the reactor began to power up. The room filled with the sound of whirring machines and buzzing electricity. The fusion core was live. Suddenly, A flash of blue light erupted from the center of the prototype. The warp bubble was forming again, bigger, brighter, more stable than before. The containment system was holding, and the energy output was exactly where they needed it to be. Elon watched, his heart racing. This wasn't just a success, it was a breakthrough. Isaac's eyes gleamed with triumph. It's working. And for the first time, Elon allowed himself to believe that the impossible might actually be within reach. The next phase of their journey had begun, and there was no turning back. The success of the latest test was nothing short of extraordinary. The team was on a high, their morale soaring with the newfound stability of the warp bubble. However, as the initial excitement wore off, reality began to set in. The breakthrough wasn't the end of the road. It was only the beginning of a much larger, far more complicated journey. Elon had always known that innovation came with its share of challenges, but the complexity of what they were attempting was beginning to weigh heavily on him. They weren't just building a piece of technology, they were attempting to rewrite the laws of physics itself. That was a heavy burden to bear. Isaac, on the other hand, seemed undeterred. He was relentless in his pursuit of the next step, his mind always one step ahead, always searching for the next solution. But even Isaac knew they were in uncharted territory. Every breakthrough led to new problems, and every answer only seemed to raise more questions. The main issue, as always, was the energy. They had managed to stabilize the fusion core long enough to generate a warp bubble, but the energy needed to maintain the bubble for any significant period of time was still far beyond anything they could produce. The power output of the reactor was still insufficient to sustain the field without it collapsing. The problem wasn't just in the design. It was in the very nature of the physics they were dealing with. The warp bubble, while stable for brief moments, required a constant supply of energy, and the fusion reactor, despite its advancements, wasn't capable of sustaining it over long periods. "We need a better power source," Isaac muttered, staring at the data. "The fusion core is too unstable. We need something more reliable. We can't keep using it like this." Elon was already thinking the same thing. He had considered alternatives, but nothing seemed viable. The best they could hope for was improving their current system, but it wasn't enough. The warp drive needed more power than anything they had ever designed before. "I think I know someone who might be able to help," Elon said, tapping his fingers on the desk as a thought occurred to him. Isaac looked up, intrigued. "Who?" Elon hesitated for a moment. He didn't often reach out to other innovators for help, but this was different. This wasn't just about making something work, it was about doing the impossible. And for that, they would need the best minds in the world. His name is David. He's a theoretical physicist, and he's been working on advanced quantum energy systems. "If anyone can help us with the power source, it's him," Elon explained. Isaac was skeptical. "I've heard of him. He's a genius, but his work is, well, unconventional." Elon smirked. "Unconventional is exactly what we need right now." Within days, David arrived at the lab. He was a man of few words, with an intense gaze and a sharp, calculating mind. His reputation preceded him. He had developed theories that bordered on science fiction, ideas that most of the scientific community had dismissed as too far-fetched. But Elon had always believed in pushing the boundaries, and David's unconventional ideas might just be the missing piece of the puzzle. "Let's get to work," David said as he stepped into the lab, his voice low and measured. Isaac and Elon showed him the current setup, explaining the challenges they had encountered with the fusion core. David listened intently, taking notes and asking pointed questions. He didn't seem fazed by the scale of the task before them. In fact, he seemed almost excited by it. "I've been working on something," David said, his eyes lighting up as he turned to the whiteboard. "It's a new concept, quantum batteries. They operate on the principles of entanglement and superposition, which means they can store an enormous amount of energy in a relatively small space. It's a long shot, but if we can tap into the right quantum states, we might be able to generate the kind of power you need." Isaac raised an eyebrow. "Quantum batteries? That sounds theoretical." David nodded. "It is, but I believe we're on the verge of a breakthrough in quantum energy. If we can isolate and stabilize the quantum states, we could have a power source capable of sustaining the warp bubble." Elon leaned in, intrigued. "So, you think this is our answer?" David paused for a moment, as if weighing the potential risks. It's not a sure thing, but it's the best shot we've got. And so, they began. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The lab became a nexus of intense brainstorming sessions, complex experiments, and endless calculations. David's approach was unconventional, to say the least, but Isaac and Elon quickly realized that there was genius in his thinking. The quantum battery concept was still in its infancy, but it was exactly the kind of radical solution they needed. Isaac was cautious. Every step forward felt like 2 steps back. There were many days where the quantum batteries seemed like nothing more than an abstract idea, but then, out of nowhere, a breakthrough would occur. One test would work. One theory would align with reality. And then, after weeks of uncertainty, it happened. David's quantum battery prototype was ready for its first test. The atmosphere in the lab was electric with anticipation. Isaac and Elon were standing by, watching as David connected the battery to the fusion core. "Here goes nothing," David muttered, activating the system. The room fell silent. For a few long seconds, nothing happened. And then, energy surged through the system. The quantum battery, despite its instability, generated a massive pulse of energy, far greater than anything they had seen before. Isaac's eyes widened. "It's working. The power, it's stable." The warp bubble was stable again, more powerful than ever. They were finally seeing the results they had dreamed of. The quantum battery had given them the power they needed to sustain the warp bubble for longer periods. Elon smiled, his mind racing with possibilities. "We've done it." But as the team gathered around, marveling at the success, Isaac couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The quantum battery was powerful, yes, but it was still unpredictable. Every test had shown fluctuations, and the potential for catastrophic failure was always there. Still, it was a victory, and victories, however small, were precious in their line of work. "I think we're close," Isaac said quietly, his mind still buzzing with the potential of what they could accomplish. "But we need more time. More testing. This isn't over." Elon nodded, his gaze distant. "The hard part's just beginning, but this is a good start." For the first time, it felt like they were truly on the verge of something monumental. But as Isaac had said, they were still a long way from the finish line. The power was there, but the warp drive was far from perfect. There were still countless unknowns to be addressed, countless risks to be mitigated. But they were closer than they had ever been. The excitement from the success of the quantum battery was palpable, but it was also tempered with a sense of unease. Elon knew all too well that the road to innovation was filled with perilous twists, and the breakthrough they had just achieved was no exception. The quantum battery, while revolutionary, had its flaws. The stability of the power source was still a major concern. They had managed to sustain the warp bubble for longer than before, but not nearly long enough to make meaningful progress. It was a start, yes, but it was still just a tiny step in the grand scheme of things. Isaac's expression, usually filled with determination and curiosity, now carried an undercurrent of doubt. He had worked tirelessly on the quantum battery design, but he knew the path forward would be a long and arduous one. It wasn't just about refining the power source, it was about finding a way to scale it. And that, Isaac knew, was the hardest part. "Elon, we need to talk," Isaac said one evening, pulling him aside from the lab's bustle. Elon looked up, sensing the shift in Isaac's demeanor. "What's on your mind?" "I'm worried," Isaac admitted, his voice quieter than usual. "I don't think the quantum battery is the answer, not the way we're using it now. It's unstable, and every time we push it further, we risk losing everything we've worked for." Elon leaned against the wall, arms crossed, considering Isaac's words. "I knew this wasn't going to be easy, but what's the alternative?" Isaac paced, the weight of the decision clearly heavy on his shoulders. "The core isn't the problem, it's the containment. If we can't stabilize the energy in a way that keeps the bubble intact without a massive risk of failure, then we'll never get anywhere." Elon didn't respond immediately. He had learned to trust Isaac's instincts, but this felt different. The stakes had grown higher, and the potential for catastrophic failure was always looming. Still, he couldn't let doubt stop them now, not after everything they had already overcome. "We've come this far, Isaac," Elon said, his voice firm. I'm not backing down, but I'm willing to listen. What's your plan? Isaac stopped pacing and met Elon's gaze. I think we need to rethink everything. The fusion core, the battery, the containment system, they're all interdependent. If we keep pushing them as they are, we're going to hit a wall. We need to overhaul our entire approach and rethink the way we handle energy production and containment. It's a monumental task, but I think it's the only way to move forward. Elon felt a flicker of hesitation, but it quickly faded. Isaac was right. This project was never going to be a straightforward path. If they didn't tackle the foundational issues now, they were bound to fail. Then let's do it. But we need to be ready for the long haul. Isaac nodded, but his eyes showed the weight of the decision. They both knew that this was a turning point, a point where they either succeeded or risked losing everything. The next few weeks were a blur of redesigns and recalculations. Isaac led the charge, diving deeper into the quantum battery concept and rethinking how the containment system could be adapted to stabilize the energy output. But as the team worked tirelessly to implement Isaac's new ideas, they were met with more resistance than ever before. Each solution led to a new complication, and every test seemed to reveal more flaws in their design. Elon, ever the visionary, kept pushing forward, but even he couldn't ignore the mounting pressure. The project was already running behind schedule, and the costs were spiraling. He had poured millions into the endeavor, and there was still no guarantee that any of it would work. Worse, the media was starting to catch wind of what they were doing. Rumors swirled about the mysterious project Elon Musk was funding. Whispers of time travel, space travel, and a new era of technological revolution. But Elon couldn't afford distractions. His focus remained steadfast, to make the impossible possible. And so, they pressed on, determined to succeed despite the obstacles that kept appearing in their path. As the weeks turned into months, the team was starting to feel the weight of their labor. The toll it was taking on their personal lives was evident. Late nights in the lab, missed birthdays, and strained relationships. The more they invested in the project, the further they seemed to drift from everything else. Even Isaac, who had once been the most dedicated of the team, started to show signs of fatigue. One evening, as Isaac sat alone in the lab, running through the same equations for the 100th time, he felt the sting of exhaustion. His mind was clouded with the uncertainty of the task ahead. The warp drive was still so far from completion. Despite all the breakthroughs they had made, they were still facing insurmountable challenges. The containment system was still failing, and without it, the warp bubble was useless. Elon walked in, noticing the fatigue in Isaac's eyes. "How's it going?" Isaac didn't look up. "It's not. We're stuck. We've hit the tipping point, Elon. We either make a massive breakthrough now, or we risk losing everything." Elon stood silent for a moment, absorbing the gravity of Isaac's words. It was true, they had reached a critical juncture. But despite the odds, he wasn't ready to give up. "We're not giving up," Elon said, his voice resolute. "This is what we've been working for. I know it's tough, but we have to keep pushing forward. We've got the best minds in the world working on this. Together, we can figure it out." Isaac finally looked up, his gaze softening. "I know. I'm not sure we can do it alone." Elon's expression softened. "You're not alone. We're in this together. All of us." The weight of Elon's words hung in the air, offering a moment of comfort amidst the uncertainty. But deep down, both of them knew that the stakes were higher than ever. The next test could either be their greatest triumph or their most devastating failure. And as they prepared for what lay ahead, one thing was certain. The future of space travel, and possibly of humanity itself, depended on the success of the warp drive. The tension in the lab was palpable. Elon stood at the center of it all, surrounded by the hum of computers, the clink of tools, and the buzz of the team working tirelessly. The quantum battery was still their best hope for powering the warp drive, but the flaws were undeniable. Despite all their efforts, they had not yet managed to stabilize the energy flow for the duration needed to make the warp bubble operational. Isaac, for his part, was a whirlwind of ideas. His mind, constantly working, often seemed to be a few steps ahead of the rest of the team. He barely slept, only pausing to refuel his mind with a quick meal or a few sips of coffee before diving back into calculations. But even Isaac could feel the pressure mounting. The theories were sound, but the practical application was proving to be a monster of its own. "This isn't just a technical issue anymore," Isaac said one evening, his voice barely above a whisper as he stared at the data on his screen. "It's a problem of the very fabric of space itself. The energy we're generating is distorting the field too much. The bubble isn't just collapsing, it's folding in on itself." Elon, standing behind him, crossed his arms. "So, we're dealing with a kind of instability at the core of the field? Is there any way to control it?" Isaac sighed, rubbing his eyes. "It's not just about control, Elon. It's about understanding the very nature of space-time. If we're creating a bubble, we need to manipulate the forces at play. But the energy density we're working with is so far beyond anything that we can easily model." Elon was quiet for a moment, mulling over Isaac's words. "So, what you're saying is we're not just creating a warp bubble, we're literally trying to reshape space itself." Isaac nodded slowly. "Exactly. And the more we push it, the more we distort the surrounding area. We need a way to shield the bubble from the outside forces, or else everything we're working on will fall apart." Elon looked out of the lab window, the stars visible in the distance. The weight of the challenge seemed almost overwhelming now. It had started as a dream, an ambitious leap forward in human history. But now, it felt like they were staring into the abyss of the unknown. How could they harness the power of the cosmos itself without being consumed by it? A sharp knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was David, the theoretical physicist who had introduced them to the quantum battery concept. His usual calm, almost stoic demeanor was now replaced with a certain urgency. "We need to talk," David said, stepping into the room without waiting for a response. "I've been working on something that might help." Isaac turned to him, eyebrows raised. "What is it?" David didn't waste time. He moved over to the whiteboard, scribbling equations and diagrams with quick, decisive strokes. "I've been thinking about your problem with the warp bubble. You're not just trying to stabilize energy, you're dealing with the interaction of quantum forces and gravitational fields. If you try to control one, you're going to destabilize the other." Isaac and Elon both exchanged a look. "Go on," Elon urged. David continued, his voice growing more animated. "What if we use a multi-layered containment system? Instead of trying to manipulate the energy directly, we could use the bubble itself as a form of shielding. If we create an adaptive field that adjusts to the fluctuations of the bubble, we could minimize the destabilizing effects." Isaac's eyes widened as he started to understand the concept. "You're suggesting that the bubble could be self-stabilizing?" "Exactly," David said. "But we need to take into account the quantum field dynamics in a way that's never been done before. We need to synchronize the outer field with the energy flow inside the bubble." Elon stepped forward, his mind racing. "This could be the breakthrough we need." David nodded, but his expression became more serious. "It will require testing, and a lot of it. The energy output we're working with could cause severe distortions. The bubble might not just collapse, it could create rifts in space-time." The warning wasn't lost on Elon. This was exactly the kind of risk that kept him up at night. But the potential, if they could make this work, was beyond anything they had ever dreamed. "If we don't try, we'll never know," Elon said finally, a spark of determination in his eyes. The team rallied around the new idea. For the first time in weeks, there was a glimmer of hope. The concept of the adaptive containment field was a long shot, but it was their best shot. They dove into the work with renewed vigor, gathering data, recalculating their previous assumptions, and beginning the construction of a new system. Days turned into weeks. The atmosphere in the lab was frenzied as they tested the new approach, each iteration bringing them closer to a solution, or further away from it. Isaac and David worked day and night to perfect the algorithm that would synchronize the quantum field with the bubble. Meanwhile, Elon focused on securing the resources they needed for the final push. The project was now at a critical juncture. There was no room for error. One late evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden light over the lab, the team stood before the control panel for the first full-scale test of the adaptive containment field. Isaac was at the helm, his fingers hovering over the controls. Elon stood beside him, eyes fixed on the screen. "We're ready," Isaac said, his voice tight with anticipation. Elon nodded. "Let's do this." They activated the system. For a brief moment, everything seemed to fall into place. The bubble began to form, and the adaptive field pulsed with energy, adjusting to the fluctuations inside the warp bubble. The data came in quickly, almost too fast for them to process. And then, the unexpected happened. The bubble held steady. For the first time, the energy output stabilized for a prolonged period, enough to maintain the bubble without collapsing. The team stared at the results, unable to believe their eyes. "It's working," Isaac whispered, his voice tinged with disbelief. Elon let out a long breath, a grin spreading across his face. "We did it." But even as the celebration began, Isaac's mind raced. He knew they had achieved something incredible, but there were still risks. The system was still untested on a larger scale, and they hadn't yet explored all the potential variables. Elon, however, wasn't one to rest on his laurels. "We've got a long way to go, but this is our first real success. We're getting closer." Isaac nodded, but deep down, he knew that this was only the beginning of a much longer journey. The warp drive could change everything. But with such immense power came an equally immense responsibility. The weeks following their breakthrough were a whirlwind of activity. The adaptive containment field had given them a crucial stepping stone, but it wasn't the final answer. The warp bubble had stabilized for the moment, but every test, every refinement, revealed new hurdles to overcome. Isaac was working harder than ever, diving into theoretical models and simulations, while Elon, with his unrelenting drive, pushed the team to continue refining the quantum battery's efficiency. The pressure was mounting. Every day, they grew closer to something monumental, but they also risked everything with each new experiment. The team was no longer just a group of scientists working on a futuristic project. They were a family, bound by a common vision of reshaping humanity's place in the cosmos. Yet even within this family, the pressure was causing fractures. The constant cycle of failures, followed by the rare moments of progress, weighed heavily on them all. Isaac, especially, was feeling the strain. He was exhausted, physically and mentally, and it was beginning to show. One evening, after a particularly intense round of tests, Isaac found himself standing outside the lab, gazing up at the stars. The night sky seemed so vast, so infinite, a reminder of how small their work really was in the grand scheme of the universe. Despite everything they had accomplished, the warp drive, this bold, audacious dream, still felt like a distant and fragile hope. The energy required to manipulate space-time itself was far beyond their current grasp. He wasn't alone. Elon stepped up beside him, his hands buried deep in his pockets. "Thinking about the next step?" Isaac nodded, his gaze still fixed on the stars. "I'm thinking about everything. This project, I don't know if it's as possible as we once thought." Elon turned to him, his sharp eyes studying Isaac's face. "You can't let doubt creep in now. Not after all we've done." Isaac shook his head, his shoulders slumping. "It's not about doubt, Elon. It's about balance. We're manipulating the very fabric of reality here. If we don't get it right, everything could fall apart. I keep thinking, what if we're doing more harm than good?" Elon stepped closer, placing a hand on Isaac's shoulder. "You're overthinking it. Sure, there are risks. There always are. But the potential here, it's bigger than us. It's bigger than the planet, even. You've always believed that." Isaac sighed, his mind racing. "Maybe I was wrong. Maybe we've reached too far." Elon looked up at the sky, a quiet intensity in his gaze. "You and I both know that change doesn't come without risk. We're standing on the edge of something that could change everything. What's the point of doing all this if we're not willing to take that leap?" The silence that followed was heavy. Isaac had spent so much of his life obsessed with the pursuit of knowledge, and now, with the stakes higher than ever, he wasn't sure if he was ready to face the consequences of what they were about to attempt. He turned to Elon, finding that familiar fire in his eyes, the same fire that had driven them this far. "You're right," Isaac finally said, his voice steadying. "We've come too far to turn back now." Elon smiled, a grin that lit up his face. "Exactly. Now, let's get back to work. The universe is waiting for us." The next morning, the team gathered in the lab for the next phase of their experiments. Isaac's new models were in place, and the adaptive field containment system had been calibrated for their largest test yet. If they could stabilize the warp bubble on a larger scale, it would be the breakthrough that would catapult them closer to their goal. The pressure to succeed was unbearable, but the excitement was undeniable. They had crossed an important threshold, one that had once seemed impossible, and now the future seemed within their reach. Elon addressed the team, his voice full of conviction. "This is it. This is the test that could change everything. If we succeed here, we're one step closer to making warp travel a reality. No matter what happens, remember, we're creating history today." The room filled with quiet nods, and Isaac, ever the perfectionist, ran through his final checks. They had already made so much progress, but this test could either confirm their approach or destroy it completely. Elon and Isaac exchanged a brief look, a silent understanding passing between them. They knew the risks, but they also knew that success would change the world. Isaac initiated the sequence, and the quantum battery hummed to life, its energy output reaching unprecedented levels. The warp bubble began to form, pulsing with the raw energy of the cosmos, bending space around it. The containment system adjusted to the fluctuations, and for a brief moment, it looked as if they had succeeded. But then, as the energy continued to build, the bubble began to shift erratically. The containment field flickered. Panic spread across the team as alarms blared and the readings became erratic. Isaac's fingers flew over the controls, but the energy output was unstable, too powerful to contain. The bubble began to collapse in on itself, the energy pulling inward with devastating force. "Shut it down," Isaac shouted, his voice tense. "Shut it down now." Elon's heart raced as the lab plunged into chaos. The bubble was collapsing faster than they could react. The containment field was failing. "Get the secondary systems online," Elon barked, his voice sharp with authority. But it was too late. The warp bubble detonated in a violent burst of energy, sending a shockwave through the lab. Lights flickered and equipment sparked. The team scrambled to safety, their hearts pounding in their chests. When the chaos subsided, the lab was eerily quiet. Isaac stood frozen, his eyes wide with shock. The console before him showed the damage. The system was down, the containment field had failed, and the warp bubble had dissipated. Elon surveyed the scene, his mind already processing the aftermath. It was a catastrophic failure, but it wasn't the end. They had come so close. Isaac slumped against the wall, his breath shallow. I don't understand. We were so close." Elon stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on Isaac's shoulder. "This isn't over, Isaac. We learned something today. We'll fix it. We'll rebuild. We've been through worse, and we're still here. We'll get it right." Isaac nodded, his resolve slowly returning. But deep down, he knew that the true challenge had only just begun. They had survived the first catastrophic failure, but would they be able to rebuild and overcome the even greater challenges ahead? The days following the catastrophic failure felt like a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. Despite the team's best efforts, nothing could shake the harsh reality that they had come so close to something monumental, only for it to all collapse in an instant. Isaac had retreated into his calculations, his mind running through every potential flaw in the system, while Elon had become even more determined. There was no time to dwell on failure. Not now. Not when the world's future was on the line. The lab had taken a hit, with equipment fried by the failed test, but the damage was mostly contained. The containment field had collapsed, and the warp bubble's detonation had left an energy signature that lingered, creating strange distortions in the nearby space. It was as if the universe itself was trying to reject their efforts, as though the laws of physics were resisting their interference. But Elon wasn't one to back down. Failure was merely an opportunity for learning, and he was resolute in finding the path forward. He gathered the team for a meeting in the aftermath of the explosion, his face as serious as ever. "We've learned something important," Elon began, his voice steady and unwavering. "We've seen the failure firsthand. We know the limits of our system. But this is not the end. It's the beginning of a new phase. We need to rethink our approach, refine our systems, and test smarter." Isaac looked up from his screen, his tired eyes betraying the fatigue he'd been carrying. "I've been running the numbers over and over. The adaptive containment field is too unstable when dealing with this scale of energy. I don't know if we can push the limits without causing more catastrophic failures. Elon nodded, understanding the concern. I know, but what if we're looking at it from the wrong angle? Maybe the containment system isn't the problem. Maybe the issue lies in how we're generating the energy. What if we need a more stable and controlled energy source? A murmur ran through the room. Everyone in the lab had been fixated on the quantum battery, believing it to be the solution to their energy crisis. But Elon's words planted a seed of doubt. Was the answer really within the quantum battery? Or were they missing something critical? I've been thinking about that too, said Dr. Elizabeth Shaw, the team's lead engineer. If we switch from the quantum battery to a more conventional but highly efficient power source, we could stabilize the energy output before it gets fed into the warp bubble system. Elon turned his attention to Elizabeth, intrigued by the suggestion. You're proposing we abandon the quantum battery? No, she replied quickly, not abandon it. But perhaps we need to pair it with something more reliable, something that can give us the constant energy flow we need without risking instability. Isaac nodded thoughtfully. It's not a bad idea. If we pair the quantum battery with a more stable, traditional power source, we might get the best of both worlds. The quantum battery gives us the raw energy, and the traditional system provides a stable baseline. We could use that stability as a foundation and feed the raw energy into a modified containment field. The idea was solid, and it provided a way forward. Yet even as the team began to lay out the plans for this new approach, Isaac couldn't shake the feeling that they were still facing an enormous unknown. Energy manipulation at this level, controlling space-time itself, was far from a straightforward task. Let's get to work, Elon said, breaking the silence. We're going to test this new approach. We'll refine the containment field, modify the energy source, and then we'll test it again. This time, we'll succeed. As the team dispersed to begin the new phase of the project, Isaac found himself deep in thought. They had a new plan, but they were still missing something. Some crucial piece of the puzzle that he couldn't quite put his finger on. The next few weeks were filled with long days and sleepless nights as the team worked tirelessly to implement their new strategy. They scoured the lab for more stable energy sources and upgraded the quantum battery, enhancing its control systems to allow for more precise energy regulation. Every detail was scrutinized, every calculation run again and again to ensure that they were moving in the right direction. Isaac found himself alone in the lab one evening, staring at the holographic projections of the energy flow patterns. The data was almost perfect, yet there was still an unsettling feeling gnawing at him. Something didn't add up. The energy was there, the systems were in place, but something felt off. He couldn't escape the nagging thought that they had missed an important consideration. His train of thought was interrupted when Elon entered, looking exhausted but determined as ever. "How's it going?" Elon asked, walking up to Isaac's side. Isaac ran a hand through his hair, letting out a frustrated sigh. "The numbers look good, but something still doesn't feel right. It's as if we're getting everything we need on the surface, but beneath it all, there's something we're not seeing. It's like we're balancing on the edge of a knife." Elon studied the projections silently for a moment before speaking. Maybe the real problem isn't in the energy flow itself. Maybe we're trying to control something that can't be controlled in the way we think. What if there's an inherent unpredictability to this kind of manipulation? Isaac froze, his eyes widening. "What do you mean?" Elon leaned closer, his voice almost a whisper. "What if we're not supposed to control it? What if the key isn't about control at all? What if it's about understanding how to coexist with the forces we're tapping into?" The words hit Isaac like a revelation. Perhaps they weren't just trying to impose order on the energy. Perhaps, to succeed, they needed to accept the chaos of it all, working with the unknown, not against it. The next morning, Isaac stood in front of the team, his eyes alight with the spark of new understanding. "I think I've got it," he said. "What we've been trying to do all along is control everything. Control the energy, control the bubble, control space-time. But what if the answer isn't control? What if we need to allow the system to adapt on its own and only guide it where necessary?" The room fell silent. Then, one by one, the team members nodded, realizing the weight of what Isaac had said. "This is the breakthrough we've been missing," Isaac continued. We need to stop trying to force the bubble into a mold and instead work with its natural tendencies. Control it where we can, but allow it to flow where it must. Elon smiled, a glint of excitement returning to his eyes. Let's test it. Let's take this next step together. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. What's one thing you've learned in your journey that completely changed your perspective? Don't forget to hit like and keep following as we prepare for the next phase of our journey into the unknown. With renewed determination and a fresh perspective, the team prepared for the next critical experiment. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in weeks, Isaac felt as though they were heading in the right direction. And no matter what the universe threw at them, they would continue to push forward, together. The next few days in the lab were marked by a renewed sense of optimism. The breakthrough idea Isaac had come up with, to guide the system, rather than attempt to control it, had unlocked a new approach. They were no longer shackled by the idea of rigid control. Instead, the team now focused on creating an adaptive, dynamic framework where the system could evolve, even as they steered it toward their goal. The project had become less about perfection and more about flexibility, less about achieving total domination over the forces they were manipulating and more about learning to work with them. Elon, always the visionary, was brimming with excitement. "This is the key," he said to the team during a meeting. "For the first time, we're moving from trying to break the rules of the universe to understanding them. It's not about forcing the warp bubble. It's about finding harmony between us and it." Isaac could see it too. There was something about this new approach that felt right. For weeks, they had been trying to force their system into a narrow, controlled path, pushing it toward a goal that seemed always just out of reach. But now, they were letting go. They were listening to the quantum system, allowing it to tell them what it needed to succeed. The first test using their new approach was set for the following weekend. The lab buzzed with activity, the quiet intensity of the past weeks giving way to a more hopeful, almost palpable excitement. The tension in the air was still there, but now it felt like anticipation rather than fear. On the morning of the test, the team gathered around the primary control panel, each member absorbed in their work. Isaac and Elon stood together, looking over the data and fine-tuning the last details. The energy levels in the quantum battery had been optimized, the containment system was adjusted to allow for more fluid interaction, and the adaptive algorithms were in place. "Are we ready?" Isaac asked, his voice steady, though a flicker of nerves ran beneath the surface. Elon nodded, his confidence unwavering. "Let's do it." Isaac pressed the button, and the hum of the quantum battery filled the room, a familiar sound now that had taken on new meaning. The energy pulsed through the system, flowing in a controlled yet fluid pattern. The warp bubble began to form, and for the first time in a long time, Isaac felt the thrill of possibility. The bubble was small at first, a shimmering, translucent sphere. It floated in mid-air, undulating gently, as if it were alive. Unlike before, it didn't collapse or flicker out of existence. It was stable, almost too stable. The room fell into a hushed silence as the team watched in awe. "Is it holding?" Elizabeth asked, her voice tight with excitement. Isaac checked the readings. "It's holding. We're at full stability." Elon leaned forward, his gaze locked on the bubble. "We've done it." Just then, a new alarm sounded. A warning light blinked on the panel. The bubble began to grow, expanding slowly, but with it came an increase in the energy reading. Isaac's fingers flew over the controls as he monitored the flow. "Hold steady," he muttered under his breath. "We need to keep it stable." The bubble grew larger, its surface rippling with energy. It was a beautiful, almost surreal sight. But the closer it came to full expansion, the more unstable it seemed. Isaac's heart began to race. "Shut it down," Isaac ordered. "It's expanding too fast. We can't maintain this much energy." But before he could reach for the emergency shutdown, something extraordinary happened. The warp bubble, far from collapsing, began to ripple, almost as though it was alive. The energy readings skyrocketed for a moment, then stabilized, and the bubble seemed to settle, almost as if it had found its own equilibrium. Isaac and Elon exchanged a look of disbelief. "Is it working?" Isaac asked, his voice uncertain but full of wonder. Elon took a step forward, his eyes wide with awe. I think we're seeing something no one's ever seen before. This is real. The bubble had expanded to the size of a small room, but it was no longer unstable. It hovered in place, a swirling, glowing sphere of energy that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly power. "Hold on," Isaac said, his voice filled with wonder as he began to run further diagnostics. The readings showed a steady state of energy. It was working. Against all odds, they had done it. But as the initial shock wore off, the reality of their success began to set in. They had achieved a breakthrough, a real, tangible breakthrough, but it came with consequences. The warp bubble was stable, yes, but it was also unpredictable. What had caused it to stabilize in the first place? Was it just luck? Or was there something deeper at play? Isaac's thoughts raced. He couldn't ignore the possibility that they were only scratching the surface of a much larger, more dangerous system. But for now, they had proven that the idea of adaptive manipulation could work. Elon's voice broke through his thoughts. "This is just the beginning, Isaac. We've taken the first step. Now we figure out how to scale it, how to make it sustainable." Isaac nodded slowly. "Right, but we need to be careful. This is uncharted territory. We can't let our excitement cloud our judgment. If we don't understand it fully—" "I know," Elon interrupted, his eyes intense. "But the moment we understand it fully, that's the moment we change the world." In the days that followed, the team worked diligently to stabilize the bubble further, testing the limits of what they had just achieved. They worked late into the night, running simulations and adjusting the algorithms that controlled the containment field. With every successful test, their confidence grew. But so did their sense of responsibility. They weren't just on the verge of breaking new ground. They were standing at the threshold of a new era in human exploration and understanding. But even as they moved forward, Isaac couldn't shake the feeling that they were still standing on a precipice. They had made it this far, but the real test was yet to come. Could they maintain the stability of the bubble long enough to make it practical for real-world applications? Or would the same unpredictability that had made their success so extraordinary ultimately bring them to their downfall? Isaac wasn't sure yet. But one thing was for certain. They had proven that the impossible was possible. And now, it was time to see just how far they could push the limits of human knowledge. The team had achieved something incredible. For weeks, they had lived in a state of heightened tension, trying to make sense of what seemed impossible. Now, standing in front of the warp bubble, the sense of accomplishment was undeniable. But for Isaac, there was still something unnerving about the way things had unfolded. The success was immense, but it came with an eerie stillness that neither he nor the rest of the team could quite explain. The problem wasn't the success itself. It was the unpredictability of it all. The warp bubble had stabilized. But how? Was it simply a fluke, a one-in-a-million chance that things had gone right? Isaac couldn't shake the thought that they might have stumbled upon something far more profound, yet infinitely more dangerous than they realized. Elon's voice broke through his reverie. "Isaac, we need to talk about the next phase. This thing is stable, but how do we scale it up? How do we make it viable for the next step?" Isaac turned toward Elon, finding the usual spark of excitement in his eyes. For Elon, the next step was always more important than the one they had just taken. But Isaac's mind was still preoccupied with the question of whether they were truly ready for the next phase. Scaling up the warp bubble was not just a matter of improving the technology. It was about understanding the forces they were dealing with, forces that seemed to defy logic itself. "We can scale it," Isaac said after a moment, though his voice lacked the usual confidence. "But we need to take it slow. This is uncharted territory. I think it's working because we've allowed it to adapt, but there's still so much we don't know about how these forces interact with one another. We're not just manipulating energy, we're tapping into the very fabric of space-time. If we push too far, we could..." "Could what?" Elon asked, his voice hardening with impatience. "Isaac, we've already come this far. The universe is waiting for us to make the next move. We have the tools. We have the knowledge. Let's not waste this opportunity." Isaac swallowed, feeling the weight of his words. "I'm not suggesting we waste it, Elon. I'm suggesting we respect it. We need more time. We need to understand this phenomenon more deeply before we try to control it any further." Elon's gaze softened for a moment, as he considered Isaac's words. It wasn't often that Elon took a step back, but Isaac's cautious approach had always been grounded in reason. It was why he trusted Isaac's judgment, even when it was at odds with his own. "You're right," Elon finally said, his voice quieter now. "Maybe we need a little more time. But let's keep pushing. The world is watching, and we can't afford to stand still." In the days that followed, the team set to work refining their process, applying the insights they had gained from the last test. They meticulously analyzed every component of the system, running simulations and creating models to predict how the bubble would behave under different conditions. Isaac felt a growing sense of dread with each new test, as the unpredictability of the warp bubble continued to elude their understanding. Despite the growing concern in Isaac's mind, there were moments of wonder. When the bubble expanded just beyond the confines of the lab, its shimmering surface captured the imagination of the team, its complexity growing with each test. It was as though they were standing on the edge of a precipice, staring into an abyss of infinite potential and infinite danger. "I've been analyzing the data," said Dr. Shaw, pulling up a new set of projections on the screen. "The warp bubble is stable, yes, but the energy density is spiking faster than we anticipated. If we don't make adjustments, we could overload the system." Isaac's heart sank. The very thing he feared was happening. "Can we regulate the energy output?" he asked, his voice tight with anxiety. "I think so," Dr. Shaw replied, her fingers flying over the holographic interface. "But it's going to require a major recalibration. We need to tune the containment field and energy regulators to match the increasing density without destabilizing the whole system." Isaac nodded grimly. This was exactly what he had been afraid of. The system was pushing its limits, and every time they took a step forward, it felt like they were getting closer to something they didn't fully understand. The balance they were seeking was so delicate, like walking on a tightrope stretched across a chasm of uncertainty. "We'll get it," Elon said, cutting through the tension in the room. "We've come this far. We're not going to let it all fall apart now." As the days wore on, the pressure mounted. The team worked tirelessly to stabilize the system, but the more they learned, the more questions arose. What they had once thought was a simple experiment had quickly become a Pandora's box of unknowns. Every modification they made to the system seemed to open new doors to uncharted territory that could lead to breakthroughs, but also to danger. Isaac found himself growing increasingly frustrated with the process. They had made progress, but at what cost? The warp bubble seemed more unpredictable with each test. It wasn't just the power output that concerned him. It was the strange fluctuations in space-time that began to occur whenever the bubble expanded. Sometimes, the bubble would ripple as though it were interacting with some force beyond their comprehension. Other times, it would distort the air around it, causing the room to warp in unsettling ways. One afternoon, Isaac and Elon stood at the center of the lab, watching as the bubble hovered in midair. It had expanded again, but this time it felt different. The energy was pulsing with an almost rhythmic intensity, as though it were breathing. "This isn't right," Isaac said softly, his eyes narrowing as he observed the energy readings. "We're getting fluctuations in the magnetic field, and the bubble's expansion is starting to distort the fabric of space-time again." Elon frowned. "What's causing it?" "I don't know," Isaac replied. "We've tested every variable, and everything seems to be within the expected range. But there's something else, something we're missing." Before Isaac could say more, the bubble began to shimmer and distort further. A sudden surge of energy sent a shockwave through the lab, knocking everyone off balance. The lights flickered, and the hum of the quantum battery became a deafening roar. For a split second, the entire lab seemed to warp, as if the space itself was bending under the strain. Isaac's heart raced. He reached for the emergency shutdown but hesitated. Something inside him told him that this moment was different. The very energy they were trying to harness was fighting back, pushing them to the edge of something they couldn't comprehend. "Shut it down now," Elon shouted. Isaac's hand hovered over the controls, but as he watched the bubble pulsate and expand, he knew this wasn't just a failure. It was the beginning of something far bigger than any of them had anticipated. The lab was a chaotic symphony of flashing lights, warning signals, and the hum of machinery working overtime. Isaac stood at the center of it all, his fingers poised above the emergency shutdown, yet his mind was far from the control panel. His thoughts were racing, as they had been since the moment the bubble began to warp in such an unexplainable way. He had never felt so unsure of anything in his entire career. What they were dealing with now wasn't just a technological marvel. It was an enigma, an unpredictable force that seemed to be growing beyond their control. "Shut it down, Isaac." Elon's voice pierced through the noise in the lab, but Isaac could hear the unease in it. Elon wasn't one to back down from a challenge, but this time, even he seemed shaken. Isaac's heart pounded in his chest. He had the power to stop it. He could end the test, cut off the energy, and they could walk away with nothing but a valuable lesson about the dangers of pushing science too far too fast. But that thought kept gnawing at him. The notion that the experiment wasn't just a mistake or a failure. It wasn't merely malfunctioning. It was doing something else entirely. Something bigger. "Isaac, we can't afford to wait." Dr. Shaw called from across the room, her face pale with anxiety. "The energy readings are spiking too high. We have no idea what might happen if this keeps going." For a moment, Isaac hesitated. His eyes flicked back to the bubble. It was no longer simply a floating sphere of shimmering light. It had transformed, almost organically, into something much more complex, something that seemed to pulse and twist in ways that defied physics. The room around it appeared to bend, as if space itself were warping and stretching in response to the bubble's expanding energy. "We need to contain it," Isaac finally shouted, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding before him. "We need to stabilize the containment fields. If we can't shut it down, we have to hold it in place. There has to be a way to stabilize it." Dr. Shaw immediately got to work on recalibrating the energy grid, while Elon worked on rerouting some of the containment systems to support the increased load. Isaac watched as the team moved with a frantic yet precise energy, working in perfect harmony under the most intense of circumstances. Seconds felt like hours as the bubble continued to swell. Isaac's mind raced. Had they already gone too far? What if the system wasn't designed to handle the amount of power they had already pushed through it? The tension in the lab was palpable, the air thick with the fear of the unknown. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, the distortion stopped. The bubble froze mid-expansion, hanging in the air like a shimmering crystal ball, its surface undulating but no longer shifting in terrifying ways. Isaac looked at the readings. The spike in energy levels had subsided. They were stable. Isaac exhaled in relief, but the feeling didn't last long. He knew this wasn't over. It was only a temporary lull, a brief moment of peace before the next unpredictable surge. "What happened?" Elon asked, his voice low and cautious. "I don't know," Isaac admitted, his eyes still locked on the bubble. "But we've stabilized it for now." Days passed, but the unease never truly left the team. They had contained the bubble, yes, but the fear lingered. Every test, every simulation, every adjustment they made to the system came with the underlying knowledge that the bubble was no longer a stable experiment. It had evolved into something entirely different, something far more powerful than they had anticipated. Isaac couldn't sleep. His mind raced with the possibilities. The way the bubble had interacted with the space around it, how it seemed to alter the very fabric of space-time, had set off alarm bells in his mind. This wasn't just an experiment anymore. It was a doorway, one they had opened by accident. And that doorway led into a realm that Isaac wasn't sure humanity was ready to enter. One afternoon, he was sitting alone in the lab, staring at the containment chamber where the bubble was safely housed, when Elon approached him. There was no usual excitement in Elon's eyes, no twinkle of new possibilities. He looked just as troubled as Isaac felt. "I know what you're thinking," Elon said, his voice unusually serious. Isaac turned to face him, trying to mask the turmoil inside. "Do you? Because I'm not sure I know what I'm thinking anymore. We've gone too far. You feel it too, don't you?" Elon asked, his gaze fixed on the bubble. The last test, the way the space-time around it began to warp. That's not just energy manipulation. That's something else. Something bigger than all of us. Isaac nodded, feeling a coldness creeping through his veins. "I don't think we can just walk away from this. But I'm not sure we can control it either. If we push forward, What are the risks? What happens if we take it too far? Elon let out a heavy sigh, running a hand through his hair. You know as well as I do that we're not just going to stop. We can't. The world is waiting for us to unlock the secrets of this technology. But if it's as dangerous as you think, Isaac swallowed hard. We might not be the ones to control it. We're on the edge of something we don't understand, Elon. And we might be on the edge of something that could tear everything apart. Elon's gaze softened, and he placed a hand on Isaac's shoulder. You've always been the cautious one. That's why I trust you. But don't forget that sometimes taking risks is the only way to move forward. We've made it this far. What if we're standing on the threshold of something that will change everything? Isaac looked at him, searching his face for any hint of the reckless optimism that Elon was known for. But all he found was uncertainty. We're standing on the edge of the unknown, Isaac said quietly, the weight of the words settling into his chest. And sometimes the unknown is too much to handle. That night, Isaac couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to him. The bubble, the warp bubble, wasn't just a scientific breakthrough. It was a new frontier, a realm where the rules of the universe bent and stretched in ways that defied logic. They had created something that could change everything, but what if it was too much for humanity to control? What if, in their quest for greatness, they had unlocked a force they weren't ready to comprehend? The next morning, Isaac gathered the team. He needed to talk to them. He needed to know that they understood the stakes of what they were dealing with. We've crossed a line, he began, looking at each of them in turn. And the truth is, I don't know if we can ever go back. This technology, it's not just powerful. It's dangerous. We've seen the effects it has on space-time. And if we keep pushing forward, we might end up creating something we can't control. We need to think carefully about our next steps. There was silence in the room. Dr. Shaw exchanged a glance with Elizabeth. Elon's face was unreadable. Finally, Elon spoke. We can't back down now. We've come too far. Isaac shook his head. I'm not talking about backing down. I'm talking about being cautious. We need to figure out what we're really dealing with. Before we take the next step, as the words left his mouth, Isaac felt the weight of them, both the gravity of their mission and the weight of what lay ahead. The lab was quieter now. Despite the still hectic energy surrounding the warp bubble, Isaac sat alone, staring at the screens that flickered with incomprehensible data. He had always prided himself on his ability to solve problems, to make sense of the most complex equations and unpredictable anomalies. But now, as he looked at the data before him, he felt more like an observer than a participant. Something had shifted in the way the warp bubble interacted with the environment. It was no longer just a scientific anomaly. It was something far greater, something beyond even his understanding. Each test brought new questions, and no matter how much they tinkered with the machine, they were no closer to understanding what they had truly unleashed. But the weight of his own doubts was only part of the equation. The world outside the lab was watching them closely. Elon's enthusiasm was uncontainable, and he spoke regularly to the media, spinning their latest progress as a step toward revolutionizing transportation, exploration, and the future of humanity. Isaac couldn't deny that the world was hungry for the breakthrough they had promised. The anticipation was palpable, and it was difficult not to be swept up in it. But Isaac knew that sometimes the brightest innovations came at the steepest price. Isaac, I need you to come see this, Elon called from the far side of the lab, his voice tense. Isaac rose from his seat, a knot forming in his stomach. Every time Elon called him over, it meant something important. Something had changed. As he approached Elon, he could see the anxiety on his face, which was unusual for someone who had lived and breathed innovation for so long without hesitation. What's going on? Isaac asked. Elon turned toward him, his expression unreadable. The bubble, it's behaving differently. We've run a series of tests, and the data doesn't add up. Something is happening to the energy signatures. It's like it's anticipating our moves. Isaac's brow furrowed. Anticipating? That's the only way I can describe it, Elon said, frustration creeping into his voice. The energy patterns are no longer responding to the parameters we've set. It's as if the bubble knows what we want it to do before we even input the commands. Isaac's pulse quickened. The idea of the bubble responding in such a way was unsettling. It wasn't just a reactive force anymore. It was evolving, adapting in ways they hadn't predicted. Are we sure the energy signatures aren't being misread? Isaac asked, trying to remain calm. We've cross-checked everything, Elon said. The system is functioning as it should, but the bubble, it's almost like it's aware. Aware of us. Aware of its surroundings. This wasn't in any of the simulations. Isaac's mind raced. So, it's conscious? Not in a literal sense, but in a way we can't fully understand. I don't know, Elon admitted, but it's not behaving like a simple physical object. It's more like a system that learns. And that's where I'm stuck. How do we control something that learns on its own? If it's evolving in ways we can't predict, how do we control it? Isaac stared at the bubble, which had grown larger in size, now almost filling the containment field entirely. The hum in the air had intensified, vibrating with energy as if the bubble was alive. The idea of something that could learn, adapt, and evolve was terrifying. There was no clear path forward, no formula to follow. We can't control it if we don't understand it, Isaac said finally, his voice steady despite the anxiety coursing through him. We need to halt everything and reassess. This is a turning point. What if the bubble is responding to something more complex than we've accounted for? Elon's eyes narrowed. You mean something outside our realm of understanding? A force we've never encountered before? Isaac nodded slowly. Exactly. We've been working under the assumption that we're just manipulating energy. But what if we're tapping into something much deeper? Something that, by its very nature, can't be controlled? For a long moment, Elon didn't speak. He stared at the bubble, lost in thought, his mind no doubt racing with possibilities. We need to communicate this to the team, Isaac said, breaking the silence. They need to know what we're dealing with. This isn't just about making history anymore. It's about understanding what we've unleashed. Elon gave a sharp nod, his expression grim. I'll call everyone in. An hour later, the team was assembled in the central briefing room. The air was thick with tension as Elon and Isaac stood in front of them, facing the group. Dr. Shaw, Elizabeth, and the others were silent, waiting for answers. Isaac cleared his throat and began. We've reached a critical juncture in our work. We've made progress, yes, but what we've discovered is something we didn't anticipate. The warp bubble is not simply an experiment anymore. It's an evolving system. The energy signatures are unpredictable. And, from what we've seen, it's responding to our actions in ways that don't fit the parameters we've set. Elizabeth furrowed her brow. Are you suggesting that it's somehow conscious? I'm not saying it's sentient, Isaac replied, choosing his words carefully. But it's definitely responding to us in ways we don't fully understand. It's adapting to its environment, our environment, and we have no idea what that means in the long run. A murmur ran through the room. Dr. Shaw shook her head. This is beyond anything we've trained for. If it's not following our instructions, then we're working with something that's outside of all known science. That's exactly it, Isaac said, his voice firm. We're working with something completely unknown. And until we understand it, I don't think we should proceed. Elon paced back and forth, his hands clenched in thought. I hear you, Isaac, but think about what we're standing on the brink of. This could change everything: space travel, energy production, even human existence. Do we really want to stop now? We need to be careful, Isaac said, his voice quiet but resolute. We can't risk it. If we don't understand it, we might be opening a door we can't close. We might be playing with something that could reshape the entire fabric of our reality. That night, Isaac sat alone in his office, his mind racing with the consequences of their actions. The world was waiting. Elon was pushing them forward, eager for the next step, but Isaac couldn't help but feel that they were standing on the edge of a precipice. One wrong move, and everything could spiral out of control. His phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. A message from Elon. We need to talk. Meet me at the lab. Isaac sighed, rubbing his eyes. He had a sinking feeling he knew what Elon wanted to discuss. But as he grabbed his jacket and headed out the door, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was the point of no return. The night felt heavier as Isaac walked into the lab. The hum of the machinery around him felt louder, almost deafening, but in a way that seemed to carry an unnerving sense of urgency. As he stepped inside, he saw Elon pacing in front of the containment chamber, his eyes focused on the bubble that had now expanded even further, its ethereal glow casting an eerie light across the room. Isaac approached him cautiously. "Elon, you wanted to talk?" Elon stopped pacing and turned to face him, his expression grim. "I've been thinking. We've been treating this like an experiment, like it's just a scientific breakthrough waiting to happen. But what if it's more than that? What if this is something bigger?" Isaac felt a chill run down his spine. The way Elon said it made his heart race. "Bigger? How do you mean?" Elon walked over to the control panel, his hand hovering over the system switches, but not pressing any. "What if this bubble, this warp field, is a doorway? Not just to new possibilities, but to something entirely different, something beyond our understanding of space and time? What if we're not just manipulating energy, but tapping into a whole new dimension of reality?" Isaac's stomach tightened. He had feared that Elon's obsession with progress would eventually lead them down this path. But hearing Elon say it aloud, it made it all the more real. "Elon, we don't know what we're dealing with here. We've only scratched the surface. We can't just keep pushing forward without understanding the full consequences." "I know you're worried," Elon said, his voice softening, but his eyes were determined. "But think about it. We're on the brink of something no one has ever even dreamed of. This could change everything, the way we travel, how we interact with the universe, even how we perceive time itself. This could redefine what it means to be human." Isaac took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He knew Elon's passion, his unrelenting drive to change the world, but this was different. This wasn't just about creating something innovative or groundbreaking. It was about stepping into the unknown, without any idea of what awaited them on the other side. "Elon, I understand the temptation. I really do. But this is dangerous. We have no idea what could happen if we push this further. What if we open a door we can't close?" Isaac's voice faltered slightly as he spoke, his fear creeping through his words. Elon's gaze softened as he looked at Isaac, but his resolve remained unwavering. "And what if we don't? What if we stop now, and the world never gets to see what we could achieve? We could be on the verge of the most significant scientific breakthrough in history, Isaac. We can't let fear hold us back." Isaac felt a knot form in his chest. The weight of their responsibility was immense, and the stakes had never been higher. If they proceeded, they could be changing the very fabric of the universe. But if they stopped, they might never know just how far they could go. For a moment, Isaac was silent. He could see Elon's conviction, his unshakable belief that this was their moment. And part of him wanted to believe it too, to embrace the thrill of discovery and the potential for greatness. But another part of him, the part that had always been cautious, always analyzed every risk, was terrified of what might happen if they didn't stop now. "I'm not saying we give up entirely," Isaac finally said, his voice steady. "But we need more time to study it, to understand it. We can't rush into this blindly." Elon's expression hardened, his jaw tightening. "We don't have time, Isaac. The world is waiting for us. We can't afford to sit back and analyze forever. We need to make a decision now." Isaac felt the pressure weighing on him, the entire future of their project hanging in the balance. He glanced at the containment field, the shimmering bubble still suspended within it, pulsing with a strange energy. It seemed almost alive, and for the first time, Isaac wondered if they had truly underestimated its potential. But no matter how much he wanted to trust that they could control it, something deep inside him screamed that they were venturing too far. "Elon, I can't do this if we don't take the time to figure it out," Isaac said, his voice firm. "If you want to push forward without understanding the consequences, I can't be a part of it. I won't." Elon looked at Isaac for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without a word, he turned away and walked toward the containment chamber, his footsteps echoing through the room. Isaac stood there, his heart pounding in his chest. He had made his choice. The silence that followed felt suffocating. Isaac wasn't sure how long he stood there, waiting for Elon to say something, anything. But when he spoke, his voice was calm, almost resigned. "You've made your choice," Elon said, his back still turned to Isaac. But I won't stop. I'm moving forward with or without you. Isaac's stomach churned. He had never seen Elon like this before. The man who had once been so willing to collaborate, to share in the pursuit of knowledge, was now determined to go it alone. And in that moment, Isaac knew that their partnership, everything they had worked for together, was on the brink of breaking. I understand, Isaac said quietly, his voice thick with emotion, but I can't follow you down this path if we're not prepared for the consequences. I just hope you know what you're doing. Elon didn't turn around. So do I. The next few days were a blur of emotions and decisions. Isaac continued to watch from the sidelines as Elon and the rest of the team pressed forward with the warp bubble experiments. Elon was relentless, pushing the limits of what the machine could do, disregarding Isaac's warnings about the risks. And while Isaac had chosen to step away from the front lines, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen, something they couldn't predict or control. The bubble, now a constant presence in the lab, seemed to grow more powerful by the hour. Its shimmering surface rippled as if reacting to the energy it was absorbing, and the hum in the air became more pronounced, vibrating with an intensity that felt like it was charging something far more significant than just the machinery around it. Then, one evening, Isaac received a message from Elon. We're ready to push it to the next level. I need you here. Isaac stood in the dim light of his office, staring at the message. It was clear that the tipping point had arrived. This was it, the moment they had all been working toward. And despite his misgivings, Isaac knew that he couldn't walk away now. He had to face the consequences of their actions, whatever they might be. With a deep breath, he grabbed his jacket and headed back to the lab. Isaac stepped into the lab once again, his heart pounding with anticipation. The atmosphere felt different, heavier. As he walked toward the containment chamber, he saw Elon standing in front of it, his face illuminated by the glowing bubble inside. The energy surrounding it was palpable, like static electricity in the air. Isaac's pulse quickened. Elon, Isaac said, his voice steady but laced with concern. Are you sure about this? We've already seen the unpredictable behavior of the bubble. Pushing it further. I don't know if that's a good idea. Elon turned slowly to face Isaac, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of determination and excitement. We've come too far to back down now, Isaac. This is the breakthrough of a lifetime. Everything we've worked for. It's all right here. He gestured toward the bubble, which pulsed with an almost rhythmic energy, as if breathing. Isaac couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. Despite Elon's enthusiasm, something deep within him told him that they were crossing a line, one that could lead to irreversible consequences. I get it, Isaac said, his voice softening, but we don't know the full extent of what we're dealing with. What if this isn't just about space travel or energy production? What if we're messing with something far more dangerous? Elon shook his head. The potential is too big, Isaac. If we stop now, we'll never know what we could have achieved. We could be on the edge of something unimaginable. Isaac was silent for a moment, staring at the bubble, the flickering lights, the hum in the air. It all seemed so unnatural. But at the same time, the idea of what they could accomplish, what they could discover, was too tempting. He had always dreamed of unlocking the mysteries of the universe. But now, that dream felt more like a siren song, luring them into dangerous waters. Okay, Isaac said at last, his voice low, but we proceed carefully. No more shortcuts. We make sure we fully understand the consequences before we push forward any further. Elon nodded, though his eyes still sparkled with the thrill of what lay ahead. Agreed. The next few hours were a blur of activity. The team gathered around the control panel, adjusting the parameters of the machine. The air was thick with focus, but beneath it all was an undercurrent of tension. Isaac found himself scanning the monitors, trying to make sense of the data that seemed to shift and flicker before him. We're ready, Elon announced after what felt like an eternity. His voice was full of anticipation, and despite Isaac's reservations, he couldn't deny the electricity in the room. This was it, the moment they had all been waiting for. Isaac took a deep breath and stepped forward. Let's begin. Elon gave a sharp nod and pressed the button to activate the system. The bubble inside the containment field began to pulse faster, its glow intensifying. The machines hummed to life, and the entire room seemed to vibrate with energy. Isaac watched, his heart racing. The screen in front of him flashed with complex data that seemed to come from another dimension. The warp bubble was responding, but not in the way they had expected. For a moment, everything seemed to be going smoothly. The bubble stabilized, expanding and contracting as they had planned. But then something changed. The hum in the room grew louder, sharper, almost as if it were a warning. The energy signatures on the monitors fluctuated wildly, jumping in unpredictable patterns. "Something's wrong," Isaac said, his voice tight with concern. "The readings are off the charts." Elon's eyes were locked on the control panel, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Adjust the parameters," he ordered. "We need to stabilize it." But as the team scrambled to recalibrate the system, the bubble inside the containment chamber began to flicker, faster, then slower, as though it were pulsing to a rhythm they couldn't control. And then, in the blink of an eye, everything changed. A burst of energy shot out from the bubble, its force shaking the entire room. The lights flickered and the machines went into overdrive, their alarms blaring in a chaotic chorus. Isaac's heart skipped a beat as he watched the bubble expand uncontrollably, the shimmering energy bending in ways that defied all logic. "Elon!" Isaac shouted, panic creeping into his voice. "Shut it down. Now!" But Elon was frozen in place, staring at the bubble with wide, unblinking eyes. The energy pulse seemed to be reaching out, spreading across the room in a growing ripple. It wasn't just a reaction from the bubble anymore. It was affecting everything. The walls, the floor, the very air around them seemed to bend and warp. Isaac's mind raced. He could see it now, the ripple effect. Whatever they had unleashed was no longer contained. The warp bubble was expanding, and with it, reality itself seemed to twist. Isaac's instinct screamed at him to act, but he didn't know where to start. They had pushed too far. Now, they were on the brink of losing everything. "Get out of the room," Isaac ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Now, everyone, get out." The team members scattered, but Isaac stayed rooted to the spot, watching in disbelief as the warp bubble expanded even further. The containment field flickered, struggling to contain the energy. It was only a matter of time before it collapsed entirely. "Elon!" Isaac yelled again, his voice desperate. "We need to stop this before it's too late." But Elon remained transfixed, his eyes locked on the bubble, as though drawn to it by some force beyond his control. Isaac knew then that there was no stopping it now. They had gone too far. With a sudden, terrifying crack, the containment field shattered, and the energy from the bubble burst forth, flooding the lab in a brilliant wave of light. Isaac felt his body being pulled in every direction as the energy enveloped him. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced, unearthly and disorienting. Time itself seemed to bend, warping and twisting as the very fabric of reality began to tear. And then, everything went dark. When Isaac regained consciousness, the first thing he noticed was the silence. The hum of the machinery was gone. The air felt still, unnaturally still. He opened his eyes, blinking as he tried to focus. The lab was no longer the lab he had known. The walls were gone, replaced by something strange, something unfamiliar. The ground beneath him felt different, softer, like a different material altogether. His heart raced as he slowly sat up, his mind struggling to make sense of what had just happened. Where was he? He stood shakily, his hands reaching out to steady himself. The world around him was distorted, as though he were looking at it through a warped lens. Colors seemed to bleed together, and the very air shimmered with an otherworldly energy. And then, he heard a voice. It was soft at first, a whisper carried on the wind. "Isaac!" Isaac froze. The voice was familiar, but there was something wrong about it. He turned around slowly, his breath caught in his throat. There, standing in front of him, was Elon. But this wasn't the Elon he knew. His expression was unreadable, his eyes distant, as though he had seen something beyond what was humanly possible. "Where are we?" Isaac asked, his voice trembling. Elon didn't answer. He only looked at Isaac, his lips curling into a faint, knowing smile. "You've opened a door, Isaac," Elon said softly. "And now we must face what lies beyond." Isaac's breath caught in his throat as he stared at Elon, the man who had once been his partner, now standing in front of him with an unsettling calm. The lab, or whatever it was that had replaced the lab, seemed to stretch and shift in impossible ways around them. The ground beneath Isaac felt unstable, like a dream that could dissolve at any moment. What have we done?" Isaac murmured, his voice trembling. He took a step backward, instinctively looking for some way out. But there was no exit, no door, no familiar shape or outline. There was nothing but the distorted, shifting landscape that seemed to have no end. Elon didn't respond immediately. He stood still, his expression unreadable, the corners of his mouth lifting into a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. His gaze was distant, almost lost in thought, as if he were seeing something beyond the place they stood. "We've opened a door," Elon finally said, his voice oddly serene, as though he had accepted whatever had happened, to something beyond understanding, beyond what we could have ever predicted. Isaac's mind raced. A door? He looked around frantically. To what? Where are we? Elon's gaze seemed to drift through the distorted horizon. A place where time and space have no meaning. Where every possibility exists simultaneously, every moment, every choice, every version of reality. You and I are just one version of this. There are infinite others. Isaac's stomach twisted with confusion and fear. He had always known there were risks to their work, but this was beyond comprehension. The bubble, the energy they had unleashed, had taken them somewhere they shouldn't be. But how? Why? And how are they going to get back? What are you talking about? Isaac's voice cracked, but he forced himself to stand tall. He couldn't lose his cool now. This isn't real. We need to get back. We have to stop this. The lab, the others, they'll be looking for us. Elon's eyes met his, and for the first time, Isaac saw something flicker, something almost human, a hint of uncertainty. There's no going back, Isaac. Not now. We've crossed into something that exists outside of the rules we know. Isaac clenched his fists, the weight of Elon's words sinking in. So we're stuck here? It's not about being stuck, Elon said, his voice quiet, almost contemplative. It's about what we can learn. This place, it holds the answers we've been seeking, the ones we've only dreamed about. Isaac could feel his chest tightening. This wasn't the man he knew. The Elon Musk he had worked with, the visionary, the dreamer, was now speaking in riddles about things that didn't make sense. This wasn't some breakthrough. This was a nightmare, a mistake they couldn't undo. What answers, Elon? We don't even know where we are. Isaac snapped, frustration bubbling to the surface. This could be dangerous. We don't know what's waiting for us. Elon took a step closer, his expression still unreadable, but now tinged with a strange kind of calm that unsettled Isaac even more. That's the point, Isaac. We've always feared the unknown, but it's time we stop running from it. What if this is exactly what we need to understand? What if the next step in human evolution, the next great leap, is hidden here in this chaos? Isaac felt a surge of panic. We don't know what we're dealing with. For all we know, this could destroy everything. Elon's eyes softened, but his voice remained firm. We can't let fear hold us back. We've been given a chance to see the universe from a new perspective, and I'm not backing down now. Isaac turned away, trying to collect his thoughts. He couldn't let Elon drag them deeper into this. They had to find a way back. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. He had to think. He had to find some way to reverse whatever had happened. But as he glanced around again, his sense of reality began to warp. The colors, the air, the very fabric of space around them. It was all shifting. The ground beneath him seemed to ripple like water, the sky overhead twisting into shapes that defied logic. Isaac reached out, his hand trembling, as he tried to steady himself against the onslaught of strange forces around him. What the hell is happening? Isaac gasped, fear creeping into his voice. Elon, still eerily calm, extended his hand toward Isaac. It's not what's happening, Isaac. It's what can happen. Everything is in flux here. Everything is fluid. What we see, what we perceive, is only one version of reality. There are infinite possibilities. Isaac pulled back, his heart racing. I don't understand. Are you saying we're in some kind of parallel universe? Elon nodded slowly, his eyes gleaming with something Isaac couldn't quite place. Or something beyond even that. A place where all timelines exist at once. A place where our choices haven't yet been made, but where they all could be made simultaneously. Isaac was overwhelmed. The weight of Elon's words threatened to crush him, and the more he thought about it, the more his mind spun. Was this possible? Could they really be in some sort of alternate reality? A realm where every choice, every path they could have taken existed? What do we do? Isaac finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. Elon's gaze was intense, his smile widening as he stepped closer. We explore, we learn, and we take control of the possibilities. We've seen what humanity has accomplished in this reality. But now we can see what humanity could become. Isaac felt a wave of despair wash over him. The man standing in front of him, once driven by reason and logic, was now consumed by something else. Something darker, more dangerous. Isaac didn't know where they were, or how they would survive this distorted version of reality, but one thing was certain. Elon's obsession with pushing boundaries had taken them far beyond their control. As Isaac stood in the strange, shifting landscape, his thoughts turned to the rest of the world, to the people they had left behind. What would happen to them? To everyone? And most importantly, what would Elon's quest for discovery cost them all? Suddenly, a crackling sound broke through the stillness, and Isaac turned to see a shadow flicker in the distance. It was distant, but unmistakable. Something, or someone, was moving toward them. Do you see that? Isaac asked, his voice tense. Elon's eyes narrowed. Yes, something is coming. Isaac's heart raced as he braced himself for whatever was about to appear out of the shifting haze. The air seemed to vibrate with energy, a charged feeling that made his skin prickle. The unknown was drawing closer, and in that moment, Isaac knew they had crossed a line from which there was no return. Whatever came next, they would face it together. But Isaac couldn't shake the feeling that what was coming might not be something they could control or survive. The air around Isaac crackled with an electric tension, the kind that precedes a storm. His heart pounded in his chest as he stared into the distance, his mind racing. Whatever was coming toward them wasn't human. It wasn't anything he recognized at all. Elon stood motionless beside him, his face illuminated by the eerie, shifting light of their surroundings. His eyes flickered with an almost predatory gleam as he stared toward the shadow moving ever closer. It's here, Elon said quietly, almost as if to himself. I knew we weren't alone. Isaac's stomach twisted. What is it? But Elon didn't answer. He didn't seem to care to explain. Instead, he stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the distant figure. It was still hard to make out any details. The image was too blurry, too distorted, but Isaac could feel something otherworldly about it. The closer it got, the more Isaac could feel the space around them bend. There was an unnatural gravity to it, like the very air was being warped. Isaac wanted to turn back, wanted to run, but something kept him rooted to the spot, as if some invisible force was holding him in place. He knew they couldn't go back to what they once knew, but at that moment, the fear of whatever was approaching seemed too overwhelming. The shadow moved closer, and now Isaac could see it, a figure, humanoid in shape but shrouded in dark, swirling energy. It was tall, its form indistinct and blurry, almost like smoke or mist made solid. Its presence sent a chill down Isaac's spine, a feeling of being watched, of something beyond his comprehension, something not bound by the laws of their reality. Isaac instinctively stepped back, his pulse quickening. What is it? What's happening, Elon? Elon turned to face Isaac, a strange smile playing at the corners of his mouth. What you're seeing is a manifestation of what's possible here. In this place, there's no set reality. Everything is fluid. But the being approaching us, this entity, is a byproduct of the energies we've unleashed. It's part of the fabric of this place. It's a creation of the ripple effect we've caused. Isaac's head spun as he tried to process Elon's words. The ripple effect. Everything they had done had broken down the boundaries between realities, and now it was evident that their actions had consequences far beyond their understanding. As the figure drew closer, Isaac's fear only grew. It didn't walk in a normal sense. It moved as though it were gliding, effortlessly crossing the warped landscape. The closer it got, the more Isaac felt a strange pull, an almost hypnotic force that seemed to bend his will. And then it spoke. The voice was not one Isaac recognized. It wasn't even a voice in the traditional sense. It was a resonance, a vibration that reverberated in his chest. It was deep, ancient, and filled with an uncanny sense of both authority and melancholy. Isaac, Elon, the voice echoed, stretching the syllables like a distant, almost forgotten memory. You have crossed the threshold. You have disrupted the flow. Isaac's breath caught in his throat. The words were heavy with meaning, and yet they made no sense. Disrupted the flow? What do you mean? Isaac asked, his voice trembling. The figure continued its slow approach, and Isaac could see now that it had no clear face, no discernible features, just a shifting, translucent form. It looked almost like a giant, swirling mass of shadow and light, its edges constantly fluctuating as if it were dissolving in the air. You have breached the boundaries of your reality, the entity intoned, its voice pulsing with power. The ripple you have caused, it will bring chaos to everything you know, and to everything you will ever know. Isaac's head spun. He could feel the implications of those words, like an invisible weight pressing down on him. This being, whatever it was, seemed to know exactly what had happened. It understood the consequences, and it was warning them. But we didn't mean to, Isaac began. But the entity's voice cut through him like a blade. You meant to expand, it said. But in your expansion, you have unleashed the unknown. You have fractured the very fabric of existence. Isaac's mind reeled. They hadn't intended for this. They never could have imagined the kind of power they were dealing with. They had wanted to push the limits, to make history, to unlock the secrets of the universe. But now, standing here, in this warped space between realities, Isaac couldn't shake the feeling that their curiosity had led them to a place they could never return from. What happens now? Elon asked, his voice quiet but steady. The entity seemed to regard them both for a long moment. Then, it spoke again, its tone grave and final. Now, you will face the consequences of your actions. The unraveling will begin. Time, space, and all that you have known will fracture and spread. The ripple will grow, and all realities will merge. You have opened the door, and there is no turning back. Isaac felt his legs weaken beneath him as the weight of the entity's words settled in. He had no idea how they could fix this, how they could stop it. They had unwittingly unleashed something so vast, so uncontrollable, that it threatened everything, the entire universe as they knew it. The entity took a step closer, its form shifting with each movement, as though it were made of liquid light and shadow. Its presence was suffocating, yet it felt oddly familiar. There was something about it that resonated with Isaac, something deep within him that tugged at his consciousness. You must understand, the entity said softly, the power you sought was never meant to be harnessed. The door you opened was not meant for mortal hands. There is no wisdom to be gained here. There is only destruction. Isaac's chest tightened. He tried to steady his breathing, but the words of the entity rang in his ears, relentless, inescapable. Then what do we do? Isaac asked, his voice barely above a whisper. How do we stop it? How do we undo what we've done? The entity's form seemed to shimmer as it gazed at Isaac and Elon. You cannot undo what has been set in motion. You can only adapt. With that, the entity turned, its shadowy form dissipating into the warped landscape, leaving Isaac and Elon standing alone once more. Isaac's mind was spinning. They were out of their depth. They had ventured too far, pushed too hard, and now they were facing the consequences of their actions. But despite the fear that gripped him, there was one thing that remained, a sense of urgency. They had to find a way to survive this, to make it out of this place and restore some semblance of order to the universe. Isaac turned to Elon, his eyes wild with uncertainty. We need to figure out what it meant, Isaac said, his voice shaking. Adapt? What does that even mean? We can't just let this happen. Elon didn't reply right away. He was staring at the place where the entity had disappeared, his expression unreadable. I don't know, Isaac, Elon said finally, his voice low. But whatever comes next, we're in this together. We have no choice now but to move forward. Isaac looked at Elon, and for the first time, he saw the same uncertainty in his eyes. Whatever lay ahead, they would have to face it. And there was no telling what might come next. The shifting landscape seemed to pulse with a strange energy, the air thick with uncertainty. Isaac stood frozen, staring into the distortion where the entity had vanished, his mind a whirl of questions. He could feel the weight of their actions bearing down on him, a crushing reminder that they had opened a door that could never be closed. But there was no time for hesitation. The entity had spoken of adaptation, of survival, and somehow, Isaac knew that was their only option now. He glanced at Elon, who was standing quietly beside him. The man's face was unreadable, but the tension in his shoulders, the slight frown that tugged at his brow, told Isaac everything he needed to know. Elon Musk, the visionary, the dreamer, the man who had always pushed boundaries, was now facing something far beyond his control. They both were. Isaac took a deep breath, trying to center himself. The unfamiliar surroundings, the warped reality, the entity's cryptic warning. It was all too much. But Elon was right. They had no choice but to move forward. Whatever lay ahead, they had to face it together. We can't just stand here, Isaac said, his voice steadying as he spoke. We need to find a way to survive this, to understand what's happening before it's too late. Elon nodded slowly, his gaze still fixed on the shifting horizon. I agree. But first, we need to find some sort of anchor, something that can help us navigate this space. I have no idea what the rules are here, but we have to test the boundaries. See if there's a way to regain control. Isaac didn't fully understand what Elon meant by testing the boundaries, but he knew that staying still wasn't an option. The longer they remained stagnant, the more dangerous this place could become. The very fabric of their reality was unstable, and every passing moment felt like it might be the last. Do you have any idea where we should start? Isaac asked, trying to keep his voice calm despite the rising panic in his chest. Elon turned to face him, his eyes gleaming with determination. We have to find the source, the energy, the anomaly that started all of this. If we can locate it, we might be able to reverse the flow. If not, Isaac's stomach churned. The possibility that they might not be able to fix this was too much to bear. But there was no choice. If they didn't try, the consequences would be far worse. Right? Isaac said, his voice tight. Let's move out. We need to find some way to make this right. Together, they began walking, their footsteps strangely muted against the shifting ground. The world around them seemed to warp and twist with every step, the landscape changing in ways that defied explanation. The colors bled together, becoming fluid, like liquid light. The air was thick with a strange hum, as if the very atmosphere was alive with unseen energy. Isaac's mind raced as they moved forward, trying to make sense of everything. What had they done? How had they ended up in this place? And what was this force that had altered the fabric of their reality? The more he thought about it, the more he realized just how fragile everything was. The world he had known, his family, his friends, the safety of normal life, seemed so distant now, so far removed from the chaos they were navigating. Elon's voice broke through his thoughts. Keep your eyes open, Isaac. This place is unpredictable. There's no telling what we might encounter. Isaac nodded, but the fear was still there, gnawing at him. Do you think the entity was telling the truth about the unraveling? Elon's expression darkened. I don't know, but I've never encountered anything like this before. Whatever it was, it knew what we had done. It was warning us, but also, it seemed like it was trying to guide us in its own way. Isaac shuddered. I don't know what to think anymore. You're not alone in that, Elon replied, his voice quiet. But we need to stay focused. We can't afford to lose sight of our goal. They walked in silence for a while, the only sound the hum of the distorted space around them. The further they ventured, the stranger the landscape became. It felt like they were moving through different dimensions, as though they were stepping in and out of various versions of reality. Isaac couldn't tell how long they had been walking, but the sensation of dislocation was growing stronger. It felt as if the very concept of time had become irrelevant here. Was it minutes? Hours? Days? He couldn't be sure. Everything felt endless. "Look," Elon said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Do you see that?" Isaac followed Elon's gaze and squinted into the distance. A flickering light was visible in the haze, faint at first, but growing steadily brighter. It wasn't like any light he had seen before. More like a pulse, like a heartbeat emanating from somewhere deep within the warped reality. "That's it," Elon said, his voice urgent. "That's where we need to go. If we can reach that light, we might find the center of the anomaly. The source." Isaac didn't hesitate. Despite the fear gnawing at him, he followed Elon's lead, moving toward the flickering light. The closer they got, the more the world around them seemed to shift. The landscape warped and bent, like a canvas being stretched, pulling them forward with an undeniable force. "Do you feel that?" Isaac asked, his voice barely a whisper. Elon nodded. "Yes, the energy is growing stronger. Whatever's ahead, we'll need to be prepared. We don't know what we'll find." Isaac's heart raced as they drew closer to the light. He could feel the energy thrumming in the air, an almost tangible force that seemed to vibrate with possibility. The ground beneath them began to glow, a pulsating blue light seeping through the cracks in the earth, illuminating their path. And then, as they reached the source of the light, everything stopped. The distortion in the air ceased. The world around them seemed to freeze in place, and for a moment there was silence, an eerie, oppressive stillness. Isaac's breath caught in his throat as he tried to comprehend what he was seeing. Before them, floating in the center of a swirling vortex of energy, was a massive crystalline structure. It shimmered with an otherworldly light, its facets refracting the strange energy that seemed to pulse from it. The air around the crystal hummed with power, and Isaac could feel the raw force of it resonating deep within his bones. Elon stepped forward, his face illuminated by the crystal's glow. "This is it," he said softly. "This is the source of the anomaly." Isaac's mind raced. Could this be the answer? Could they reverse the flow, stop the unraveling before it was too late? "We have to find a way to stop it," Isaac whispered, his voice trembling. "We have to fix this." Elon's eyes gleamed with the same intensity they always had. "We will," he said, his voice firm. "But we have to understand it first." Isaac stared at the crystal, feeling the weight of everything that had led them here. They were standing at the precipice of something far beyond their comprehension. And whether they succeeded or failed, one thing was certain. Their journey was far from over. Isaac stood frozen, staring at the crystalline structure before him. The hum of energy that reverberated through the air seemed to grow louder, pulsing with a rhythm that felt almost alive. It was as if the crystal itself was breathing, expanding and contracting in time with some ancient, forgotten heartbeat. The eerie glow that emanated from the crystal filled the air with a sense of awe and dread. Whatever this thing was, it held the answers to everything they had been searching for. Or at least, Isaac hoped it did. Elon took a step forward, his expression thoughtful. "This is it, Isaac," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The heart of the anomaly." Isaac felt his heart race in response. The words felt too big, too overwhelming to fully grasp. How could this crystal be the center of it all? It was just a thing, a glowing, alien structure. Yet everything about it screamed of power beyond understanding, the kind of power that could tear apart worlds. But Elon's confidence was unwavering, even in the face of the unknown. Isaac couldn't help but admire that about him. Elon had always been driven by a singular vision, a relentless pursuit of knowledge and progress, even when the cost seemed too great. But now, with the universe itself unraveling around them, that drive felt both comforting and terrifying. "What do we do now?" Isaac asked, his voice cracking slightly. "How do we interact with it?" Elon glanced back at him, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "I don't know yet, Isaac, but we're going to find out." Elon stepped closer to the crystal, his hand reaching out slowly as though sensing the danger in touching it. The crystal surface was smooth and cold, its facets shifting in ways that made Isaac's head spin. Each facet seemed to contain endless possibilities, endless realities, each one trapped within its refracted light. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Isaac hesitated, but something pushed him forward, some instinct telling him that they had come too far to turn back now. He stepped up beside Elon, his hand just inches away from the crystal. Suddenly, the world seemed to lurch around them, the very air vibrating with an almost painful intensity. Isaac's vision blurred as the space around them began to bend and twist, like the fabric of reality itself was being stretched and torn apart. The crystal pulsed with an overwhelming light, and for a moment, Isaac was blinded by the brilliance. He stumbled back, his heart hammering in his chest as the world around him spun wildly. "What's happening?" Isaac gasped, his voice trembling. Elon, too, had been thrown back, but he quickly regained his footing. "It's reacting," he said, his tone filled with awe. "The crystal is responding to us. It's sensing our presence." Isaac looked around frantically, his mind struggling to catch up with what was happening. Sensing our presence? What does that mean? Before Elon could answer, the crystal began to vibrate, its light intensifying. The air around them grew thick, charged with energy. Then, a voice, deep, ancient, and unmistakably otherworldly, boomed through the chaos. "You have come seeking answers," the voice rumbled, its tone both commanding and mournful. "But what you seek comes at a cost." Isaac's breath caught in his throat. The voice seemed to echo in his mind, vibrating through every fiber of his being. It wasn't just a voice, it was a presence, a consciousness that seemed to be everywhere at once. Elon's eyes narrowed, and Isaac could see the familiar spark of determination in them. "What kind of cost?" he demanded. "What do you want from us?" The crystal pulsed again, the voice growing louder, more insistent. "The cost of knowledge is the unraveling of your reality," it said. "Every action has a consequence. The flow of time, the balance of existence. You have disturbed it, and now you must pay the price." Isaac's head spun as he tried to process the words. The cost of knowledge? The unraveling of reality? Was that what they had done when they began this journey? Had their pursuit of understanding led them to this moment of destruction? He felt a sinking feeling in his stomach. "We didn't mean to," Isaac began, but the voice interrupted him, its tone filled with a strange, ancient sorrow. "Intentions matter not," the voice said. "The fabric of reality has been torn. It is too late to undo the damage." Elon stepped forward, his voice steady despite the weight of the revelation. "Then what do we do now? How do we fix it?" The crystal flickered, its light shifting in hue, becoming more iridescent, more fluid. For a moment, Isaac thought he saw faces, fleeting images trapped within its facets, visions of distant worlds, of past and future moments, all interwoven in a tangled web of existence. "The crystal is a conduit," the voice continued, "but it is also a prison. It holds the power to heal, but only at great cost. If you wish to restore the balance, you must sacrifice that which is most precious to you." Isaac's stomach twisted at the implication. A sacrifice? What did that mean? Was there something they had to give up? What could they possibly lose that could restore balance to a reality that was already slipping through their fingers? Elon's voice broke through his thoughts. "What does the sacrifice entail?" he asked, his tone steady, but there was an edge to it, a trace of fear that he couldn't quite mask. The crystal pulsed again, its energy seeming to intensify with every word. "To restore balance, you must offer up what you hold dearest," the voice intoned. "Only then will the flow be mended. But be warned, once the sacrifice is made, there is no returning. The decision is final, and the consequences will echo across the multiverse." Isaac's mind reeled. What could they sacrifice? What did they hold dearest? His family? His life? The future he had hoped for? And even if they could bring balance back, would it be enough? Could they undo the chaos they had unleashed? Elon stepped back, his expression unreadable. Isaac could see the struggle in his eyes, the same doubt that was gnawing at Isaac's own soul. They had come so far, but now they were being asked to give up something more precious than they could comprehend. Is there no other way? Isaac asked, his voice hoarse. The voice was silent for a moment, the crystal dimming slightly as if considering the question. Then it spoke, its words heavy with finality. There is no other way, it said. The fabric of existence cannot be mended without sacrifice. Choose wisely, for once the decision is made, there is no turning back. Isaac swallowed hard, his mind racing. The weight of the choice before him felt like it was suffocating him. They had come this far, but now they stood at the edge of something far greater than anything they had imagined. What would they choose? Would they be able to make the right decision, or would they doom themselves and the rest of the multiverse in the process? Elon turned to him, his face solemn. We have to do this, Isaac. We don't have a choice. Isaac nodded, his throat tight. Whatever came next, there was no turning back. Isaac knew the time had come to make a decision. But how could they possibly choose what is sacrifice when it felt like everything was slipping through their fingers? The unknown loomed larger than ever, and the clock was ticking. The air around them seemed to thicken, the weight of the crystal's warning pressing down on Isaac's chest. The landscape continued to distort, a swirling mixture of light and shadow that mirrored the confusion in his mind. The crystalline structure before them hummed with a force that felt almost alive, as though it were aware of their every thought, every hesitation. Isaac felt his stomach churn. He glanced at Elon, who stood motionless beside him, his eyes locked on the crystal as though trying to decipher its meaning. Elon had always been a man of conviction, someone who could face the unknown with unwavering determination. But now, for the first time, Isaac saw doubt flicker in Elon's gaze. It was a look he had never expected to see. Elon's voice was low, barely above a whisper. It's not what I expected, Isaac. I thought we were making progress, that we could find a way to fix things, to reverse the damage. But this is different. Isaac swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. What are we supposed to do? The voice said we have to sacrifice something. But how can we choose? What could we possibly give up that would make a difference? Elon didn't answer right away, his mind seemingly racing through the same questions. He turned to face Isaac, his expression filled with uncertainty, but also a glimmer of resolve. We have no choice, Elon said quietly. The voice was clear. If we don't make the sacrifice, the unraveling will continue. The multiverse will collapse. We can't let that happen. Isaac's mind raced. The implications of what Elon was saying were almost too much to bear. They were standing on the edge of something that could destroy everything they knew. And yet, they had no real answer. No clear path forward. Isaac looked back at the crystal, the haunting glow pulling at him, urging him to understand. The entity's words echoed in his mind, sacrifice that which is most precious to you. The more he thought about it, the more it seemed like an impossible task. What could they sacrifice that would make a difference? Could they truly fix what they had broken without losing everything in the process? Isaac closed his eyes, his mind flooded with memories. The faces of his family, the laughter of his friends, the life he had taken for granted. Was it one of these things that he had to give up? Could he? He had always fought to protect the people he loved. Was he really willing to let go of them for the greater good? And what about Elon? What was it that Elon held most dear? Was it his vision of a better future, the drive to push humanity forward? Was that his sacrifice? Or was it something deeper, something more personal? Isaac had known Elon for years, but in this moment, he realized how little he truly knew about the man standing beside him. The crystal seemed to pulse, its light growing brighter and more intense, as if sensing their indecision. Isaac could feel the energy surrounding them, thick and heavy. It was suffocating, pressing in on all sides. What if we're wrong? Isaac finally asked, his voice filled with a mixture of fear and frustration. What if this isn't the only way? What if we make the wrong choice and end up making things worse? Elon met his gaze, his eyes filled with an intensity that Isaac had come to recognize all too well. Elon had never been one to shy away from making difficult decisions, even when the cost seemed too high. But now, in the face of the unknown, Isaac could see that even Elon didn't have all the answers. "We're not going to know unless we try," Elon said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty in the air. "But we can't let fear paralyze us. We've come this far. We can't stop now." Isaac nodded, trying to steady his breathing. The pressure was overwhelming, the weight of the decision hanging over them like a shadow. The very fabric of reality was at stake, and the responsibility rested on their shoulders. He closed his eyes again, his mind flashing through all the possibilities. Was there a way to change things without making the sacrifice? Was there a way to reverse the damage without losing what mattered most? But the voice from the crystal had been clear. There is no other way. They had to make a choice. Isaac turned to Elon, his heart heavy. "Do you know what you would sacrifice?" he asked quietly. Elon's eyes softened for a moment, his gaze distant. He didn't speak immediately, but Isaac could see the conflict playing out in his eyes. Finally, Elon exhaled sharply and met Isaac's gaze. "I've spent my life building things, Isaac," Elon said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've always believed that progress is the most important thing, the future of humanity. I've sacrificed so much to get here, my family, my time, my peace of mind. But I'm not sure if I'm ready to sacrifice what matters most now." Isaac felt his heart skip a beat. "What are you talking about?" Elon's expression became even more serious. "I'm talking about the future, Isaac. My vision. What if the sacrifice is that? What if we have to give up the very thing that has driven us to this point, the dream of a better world?" Isaac stared at Elon, his mind reeling. Could it really be that simple? Was the sacrifice the very thing that had driven them all this way? The hope for progress, for a future where humanity could thrive. But Elon was already shaking his head, as if reading Isaac's thoughts. "But I can't be certain, Isaac. I can't know what the right choice is. Not until we do it." Isaac swallowed hard. "And what if we make the wrong choice?" "We'll never know unless we act," Elon replied, his voice resolute. "And in the end, we'll have to live with it. There's no going back." Isaac felt a pang of fear in his chest, but there was something else there, too. A strange sense of clarity, as if the fog that had clouded his mind for so long was finally beginning to lift. The choice was theirs. They could no longer wait. The unraveling of reality was still happening, and they were the ones who had to stop it. Isaac looked at Elon one last time, their eyes meeting in a silent understanding. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The voice from the crystal echoed in the distance, its words heavy with finality. "The time has come. Make your choice, or face the consequences." Isaac took a deep breath and stepped forward. He didn't know if he was ready for what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. They had to make a choice, and they had to make it now. As the crystal pulsed before them, Isaac knew that whatever decision they made would change everything. But the only way forward was to choose. And the cost would be greater than they could ever have imagined. The pulse of the crystal grew louder, its light enveloping everything in its path, as if the very essence of the universe was being recalibrated. Isaac could feel it deep in his bones, a hum that reverberated through the air, through the very molecules that made up his body. The pressure to decide was suffocating. The weight of the responsibility pressed on him, but so did the weight of all their actions that had led them here. Everything had brought them to this moment. Every choice, every decision, every step. It had all led to the crystal, the one thing that could save them, or destroy everything. Isaac stood motionless, his heart racing. The voices of doubt were growing louder in his head. What if they were wrong? What if this was a trap, a deception meant to tear them apart? The crystal had spoken, promising a sacrifice, but what was it truly asking of them? And could they afford to make the wrong choice? Beside him, Elon stood, his hands clasped tightly together, his jaw clenched in concentration. Elon Musk had never shied away from impossible choices. His entire life had been one of pushing boundaries, breaking barriers, and making the unthinkable possible. But now, even he was shaken. Isaac had never seen him this way, vulnerable, uncertain. "What do we do, Elon?" Isaac's voice broke through the tense silence, his words more desperate than he intended. "I don't know what to choose." Elon's eyes were locked on the crystal, his mind clearly racing, analyzing the words of the entity they had encountered. The words about sacrifice, about irreversible choices. The very foundation of the multiverse rested on their shoulders, and the weight of it felt heavier than any one person should carry. "You're not alone in this, Isaac," Elon finally spoke, his voice steady despite the storm swirling inside him. "We've made it this far together. We've built something more than just technology. We've built this together." Isaac's gaze flickered to Elon, confusion clouding his thoughts. What did Elon mean by, "we've built something together"? Were they talking about their accomplishments? Or was Elon talking about something deeper, something more personal? "It's not just about the future," Elon continued. "It's about us. We've made this journey, and whatever choice we make, whatever the sacrifice is, we'll make it together." Isaac's heart tightened. Could they really do this? Could they make a sacrifice so great, so final, that it would alter the course of existence itself? Was the cost of saving the universe something they could bear? Suddenly, the voice of the crystal spoke again, this time more insistent, its tone sharp and final. "You must choose now." The urgency in the voice cut through Isaac's thoughts like a blade. There was no more time for hesitation, no more room for doubts. The universe, the fabric of time and space, was crumbling around them, and the only way to restore balance was to make a choice that would alter their very lives and the future of everything. The crystal's glow intensified, casting strange, shifting shadows across their faces. The very air felt charged, as if the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting for them to act. Isaac closed his eyes, feeling the swirling energy around him. The sacrifice, whatever it was, needed to be made. But what could he give up? His family? His future? His dreams? Elon placed a hand on Isaac's shoulder, the gesture grounding him in a moment of clarity. "You don't have to decide alone. Whatever happens, we'll face it. We'll make it through, just like we always have. Together." Isaac opened his eyes and looked at Elon, seeing the sincerity in his gaze. The truth of it hit him all at once. The future they were fighting for wasn't just about the science or the technology. It was about the people they cared for, the ones they loved, the ones who had shaped them, the ones they would never stop fighting for. For a brief moment, Isaac imagined a future where everything was perfect, a world that worked, a world where every struggle had meaning and every victory was worth the cost. But then, the cold weight of the crystal's warning returned. The sacrifice would be a heavy one, and once made, it would change everything forever. "I can't," Isaac began, his voice trembling as the thought of what he might lose sent a wave of panic through him. "I can't imagine giving it up. I can't lose everything." But Elon's face softened with empathy. "You're not losing everything. You're giving up what we don't need in order to save what we do." Isaac's eyes filled with tears. Could he really give up something so precious to save everything? Would it be worth it? Was this the price of progress? Without thinking, Isaac reached out toward the crystal. His fingers brushed against the surface, and the world seemed to shift. The hum of energy surged, and the crystal's light seemed to explode outward, wrapping around him like a warm embrace. The sensation was overwhelming, disorienting, but also strangely comforting. "This is it," Isaac whispered. "This is the moment." As the light from the crystal intensified, a flood of images filled Isaac's mind. He saw his life flash before his eyes, his childhood, his family, the friends who had shaped him. He saw Elon, his partner in this journey, the person who had pushed him beyond his limits. He saw the world, both broken and beautiful, fragile and strong. And in that moment, Isaac understood. The sacrifice wasn't about losing everything. It was about choosing what truly mattered. The crystal pulsed one final time, and a voice echoed in Isaac's mind, "The choice is made." And just like that, the light from the crystal faded. Isaac blinked, his vision clearing. He looked around and saw that the world had returned to its natural state. The swirling chaos, the ripples in the fabric of reality, were gone. The tension in the air had lifted, leaving behind a quiet, serene calm. Elon stood beside him, his expression one of quiet resolve. "We did it," he said softly. Isaac didn't know how to respond. They had done it, They had made the impossible choice. They had sacrificed what was necessary to restore balance. But as he looked at Elon, he knew that the true cost of their decision wasn't just the world they saved. It was the bond they had forged, the unbreakable connection that had brought them here. Together, they had altered the course of history. Together, they had rewritten the future. And though the sacrifice had been great, Isaac knew that they had chosen the only path that could save everything they held dear. The journey was far from over, but now, for the first time in a long while, Isaac felt hope. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. Isaac and Elon made the final, impossible choice. The journey isn't over, but they've changed everything. What would you sacrifice to save everything you love? Share your thoughts and stay tuned for more adventures. As the world settled into its new balance, Isaac knew that the true story had only just begun. The crystal's secret had been revealed, but what awaited them next was a new beginning, a future they would shape together.